You guys to the Los Angeles City Fire Department's Frank Hotchkiss Memorial Training Center. My name is Andy Ruiz. I'll be the moderator for today's seminar. We're excited to have you guys here, all of you. It's kind of funny because we have more traffic issues today than we did yesterday with the entire Dodger parade. I don't get it. So, but we got some more people coming in. It's going to be a pretty exciting day. But just a couple announcements before we actually start this seminar. If you guys need to use the facilities, it's going to be over here to my left, to your right. We have the bathroom facilities. We also have one go out to the foyer at the intersection, turn left, and there's some other facilities down there as well. If they're full, there's a lot of facilities down below in our basement. Please feel free and take a look. Actually, do want you guys to take a walk around in your breaks and learn a little bit about the Frank Hotchkiss Training Center, which I'll tell you a little bit about shortly. But a few check-in opportunities. We'd like you to check in. LAFD, we have a QR code. Please check in that you're here attending the seminar. After the seminar, this is being recorded. We're going to send you the entire recorded program with the PowerPoint. So that would be something that you guys can reflect back on and actually start training on, which we know you will. That's why you're here. You're here to immerse yourself in some good training. But please check in. Also, your lunch orders. We have an AM and a PM session. The AM session is going to be here with us for the lecture. The PM session is going to be with Tesla. Down below, you have a Tesla experience. Go through some interactive anatomy of the vehicles and where the batteries are at and where some of the hazards are at. So I think it's going to be a really good day for you. But please check in with Tesla. They're in the foyer. You can get your rotations. I got 3 rotations. You got to sign up so you can have that true experience with them. And then also check in with lunch. If you're going to have lunch with us, Engineer Jimenez, can you raise your hand, please, sir? He's at that table. Please see Engineer Jimenez, and he'll get you checked in for lunch. It's $20, and you're going to have a good meal, a brisket sandwich today. So, okay. So let me get the thank yous out. I got to thank my team, the in-service training section. Thank you, members, for assisting us in setting this up. I got to thank the members all the way in the back in the yellow. Thank you, CERT team and the Explorer team. If you see the blue shirts, please thank them. And LAFA, the Los Angeles Firefighters Association, for providing your coffee and your snacks for the morning. So thank you for that. All right, now in the LAFD, we're very traditional. We respect our flag, we honor our flag, and we will salute the flag today to start this session off. Before we do that, we also honor somebody that comes up and actually leads us in the Pledge of Allegiance, and that is someone that has a lot of experience in the military. And this member is a part of our team for 25 plus years. He's our boat pilot. But don't just think he's just a boat pilot. Does a great job out there for us. Amazing job. This member has recently retired 30 plus years in our military at the highest level. He was a command master chief in the SEAL team, Navy SEAL. So he's been a Navy SEAL for over 30 years. He disappears, comes back, disappears, comes back. Combat ready, combat proven. This man has so many awards that we can't even put on 3 pages, but we just try to give you a snapshot of what he's done. So it is my honor to introduce you, the man that's going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, as Command Master Chief Mike Stephenson.
You humbled me, brother. Please stand. Pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated.
A true American hero right there. Thank you, Mike. Thank you for your serving your country and your department. All right, so all you that are out there, you that have the courage to wear that badge and to go to work every day not knowing what is going to happen to you, whether you're going to come home or not, our job is dangerous. Even when things go right, things will go wrong. That is the guarantee for what your career is. That's why you're here. So with that, we're going to bring up our chaplain, Chaplain Negretti, that's going to do our invocation. He wants to give you a blessing for safety. Chaplain George Negretti.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you. Yesterday was a good day. Today, I'm sure, will repeat itself. It's great that the fire family is present. I've seen Oxnard, Big Sky, Montana, and points in between. Palm Springs, you're welcome. Please enjoy your day and share the information. Yesterday, I failed to do something, and I want to make sure I do it today. The subject matter experts that are here today, we call them civilians, but we know that we would not be who we are without our civilian staff and those that help us. So I want to thank you, presenters and those in the parking lot, for being here and making us better and safer. Please bow with me for a word of prayer. Father God, thank you for this morning, this day, this time, and this training. God, I pray that you would use it in our lives, each one of us in our departments, as we serve, strengthen the team effort, that we would be more efficient, effective, and safe, that we would be able to go home in the morning to our families. And I do pray for our families, those that love us and support us and encourage us and put up with us at times. Thank you for who we are because of who they are in our lives. God, we offer up today. We thank you for your presence and our opportunity to serve in your name. Amen.
Thank you, Chaplain Negretti. All right, we're waiting for the fire chief to be here shortly, but before we get into the seminar, oh, chief is here. Okay, our current fire chief, who is Chief Ronnie Villanueva, is unable to be here. He is our interim fire chief. If you are the praying type, we ask that you please say a prayer. He's going through a tragedy in his family. But we do have the newly appointed fire chief here with us today. He's a friend, been a friend of mine since I got on the job. He's a member that is going to pick up where Chief left off and continue to drive the LAFD toward that goal line that we're supposed to be at. So we're excited. I would like to introduce you to a friend, a colleague, now my fire chief, Chief Jaime Moore.
Good morning, everybody. It's an honor to be here this morning. I was able to come in yesterday morning before all of the Dodger activities, which really kind of hindered downtown Los Angeles and the traffic around here, but it's good to see the turnout today. And I know we had a lot of our members who couldn't make it yesterday because they were committed to the Dodger festivities, which all went really well. LA got to celebrate its second world championship in a row. And I'm looking forward to possibly going for a third, because that's what everybody was talking about yesterday at the awards ceremony. It was pretty awesome to see those guys out there on the field and just absorbing all the fans and all the positive energy coming out of Los Angeles. It's an honor to be appointed fire chief. As Cam Ruiz said, we're longtime friends. I remember when he was trying to get on the job, calling me all the time, asking me when applications were going to open up, and then studying, getting ready for his interviews. And now look where he is. He's named Firefighter of the Year, which was well-deserved. And now he leads our in-service training, and he's bringing activities like this to not just the city of Los Angeles, but the region, to the state. We've had firefighters from all over yesterday. There were firefighters here from as far away as Alaska, and we had our friends from Mexico here. Bienvenidos si son de Mexico. Gracias por venir hoy. As he mentioned, some of you guys might know me as Jamie Moore. It's kind of I'll explain it real quick because I know it was kind of weird for people. They're like, did he change his name to become fire chief? No, my name's really Jaime. It was my birth given name by my mother, who's from Guadalajara, Mexico. I got to second grade. I happen to have a Jewish teacher. The word Jaime is derogatory term to people of the Jewish faith. And so she said, you are not going to be known as Jaime. You will be known as Jamie. And when you grow up in a place like Venice, when everybody's name is Blair, Sonny, and all these other hippie names, Jamie kind of fit in really well, and it kind of made me cool. So it stuck with me from second grade all the way through to my career. But when the mayor and I were talking, she says, I've always mispronounced your name. How do you pronounce your name? I said, well, if you're Hispanic, you'd call me Jaime. If you speak English, you call me Jamie. And so she goes, well, then your name is Jaime because you're Hispanic. So it only makes sense. So hopefully that explains it to all of you. If those of you who sent me a text message to say congratulations, I want to say thank you. And I'm doing this openly right now, kind of as a plea for forgiveness. I've never even heard of this before. I went to bed Friday night after she announced it. I woke up in the morning with 783 text messages and over 10,000 emails. I never knew so many people were on Facebook, and I didn't know how that many people were on LinkedIn, because I swear every firefighter in the United States started trying to friend me or link me on LinkedIn, and I couldn't even find a regular email amongst all these I want to connect and I want to be friends on Facebook. So it was kind of overwhelming. So my phone froze, and I had to get a new phone because it all locked up. So I apologize if you send me a text, and I know some of my friends out there sent me texts. I apologize. But again, let's get down to what this is all about. This is all about your safety. And it's impressive to see the number of patches we have from all over the region down here to learn about electric vehicles. I want to acknowledge, I want to acknowledge some of our guests here, and I think it's important that you realize that how important what you're learning about today is, not only for us as firefighters, but us in our community. We have Assemblywoman Jackie Irwin here, who is the Assemblywoman in charge of the Palisades in Ventura County. And we were just talking in the back before I came up. She was expressing that this training couldn't be more timely. And that's absolutely the truth. For those of you who responded to the Palisades fire, to the Eaton fire, not only did we have the devastation of the fire itself, but then we had the aftermath and the cleanup and dealing with all the electric vehicle batteries, which presented a big challenge for all of us. And it was a big concern for us from a health and safety standpoint. So the things that you're learning today are definitely going to be takeaways, because we're seeing these batteries in so many different areas of our society. We knew they were coming in passenger vehicles. We started seeing them in our kids' scooters. You started seeing the bird scooters and all the other traveling scooters that are around the city. We see them in motorcycles now. You see these like little miniature gangs of Hell's Angels on e-bikes that are all over the city, and they're doing these street takeovers and stuff like that. But you see these things, they look like, I mean, they look like the motorcycles we used to dream of when we were young kids, going from a 2-stroke to a 4-stroke. Now they're run by electricity. We have recreational vehicles, but even more so, we're seeing them in the toys that our kids are buying. And we're going to see a lot more of them come this Christmas when you can go on Amazon and buy these electric hoverboards and scooters and all the toys and things that people are buying, and they're bringing them into their household, and they don't realize the hazard they're bringing in. They don't realize the danger when they plug these things in and charge them up that they present. Unfortunately, we've seen it firsthand. We actually had a lithium-ion battery fire in a high-rise structure here in the city of Los Angeles. Our firefighters went up. The fire was held in check with a sprinkler head. Seemed like a pretty easy fire to handle. They were in the overhaul stages. They were wearing PPEs, but they weren't wearing any breathing apparatus or anything to protect the respiratory system. And unfortunately, one of our firefighters succumbed to the vapors that were being off-gassed by the batteries on their way to removing the hazard. He's still off. And what we're now concerned with was what damage was caused to his respiratory system. And then also when you start really learning into this stuff, it actually affects your skeletal system. So you got to be really careful with this stuff. And I could not emphasize anymore. So yesterday I was here to kick it off, and I was actually very fortunate to be able to see some of the displays that you guys are going to be able to climb into, look at, talk to Tesla, talk to FSRI, and all our other partners. We've got sanitation out there. Look at their vehicles. For those of you who are in other cities, find out where these vehicles are being kept, find out how they're being charged. Look at the charging stations, look at power walls, look at solar panels. In the LAFD, we start training our probationary firefighters really early on to take a look at the type of occupancy they're walking into, whether it's commercial or residential, and just take in all those observations. Not only are you looking now at the type of construction, the type of roofing material, the access through the doors, the type of security they have, but now you're looking for things like solar panels. Where's the solar coming down to? Are you shutting down the solar? Is somebody tapped into the solar? Is it a legally installed solar system? All those things have to come into play as you're going into your firefighting operations. So obviously it's elevating the need for you to have good situational awareness, and that stuff's got to be communicated on the fire ground. Whatever you do, don't let your guard down. Don't let your guard down. Take what you're learning today seriously. For those of you who have partners back at the station that couldn't make it, or those of you who are watching online, try to get the materials you can. It doesn't replace coming here and being here firsthand and listening to these instructors talk about the hazards. And it does not replace going out and actually seeing these vehicles. So I really want to commend Cam Ruiz and the in-service training section for bringing what they brought here. It takes a lot of work to coordinate one of these training and seminars. I'm glad they were able to do it over a couple of days, so it wasn't just one shift that was able, or 2 shifts that were able to make it. So this kind of opened it up to all 3 shifts, at least for us. But it gives you an opportunity to go out there and see these things firsthand, and it's all in one place. So I recommend you see what you got out there, and then go back in your own district, take a look at the charging stations, take a look at your sanitation yards, your MTA bus yards. Talk to the people who are running these things so that you know where power shutoffs are, and you know how to handle it, and learn everything you possibly can, because you need to train like your life depends on it, because after today, I hope it really emphasizes that it really, really does. So keep up the hard work. Thank you again. I hope you take home a lot of nuggets of information, and welcome to Los Angeles if you're visiting. And yesterday I highlighted some of the departments that are here, and I'll just go over some of them because I think it's kind of cool. You guys look at some of the patches. We obviously have LAFD, and thank goodness we have our partners over at LA County that are here. We got Chula Vista Fire Department, Culver City Fire Department, Montebello, Torrance, Beverly Hills Fire Department. Please say hi to those members from Los Angeles Fire Department that are now over at Beverly Hills. Anaheim Fire Department, Double Oak Volunteer Fire Department, OCFA, Rialto Fire Department, Long Beach Fire Department, PG&E, Sierra Madre Fire Department, Laverne Fire Department, our Central Matsu Fire Department, Huntington Beach Fire Department, Santa Monica Fire Department, CAL FIRE, San Jose Fire Department, Downey, GD NASCO Fire Department, Lead. Yesterday, I met some guys from the Air Force Base that were here. Tracy Fire Department, Long Beach again, Hemet, South County Fire, South San Joaquin Fire Authority, Pasadena Fire, Downey, Orange City, Ontario Fire, Oxnard, Glendale, San Diego Fire Rescue, Anaheim, Boulder City, and I can't forget Monterey Park. That also has an incredible new fire chief, who's a good friend of ours here in Los Angeles Fire Department. We got people from Las Vegas, Oceanside, Brawley, Sacramento, and yesterday we had some people here from Alaska. I don't know if we have our firefighters from Alaska, and then also we had firefighters from, as I mentioned earlier, from Mexico. So welcome to the Los Angeles Fire Department. Welcome to Los Angeles. I hope you get a lot of good information today, and you take advantage of the opportunities you have. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Looking forward to your leadership and see where it's going to take us these future weeks and months and years. So, okay, so it would be remiss of me if I didn't educate you a little bit on this facility, the Frank Hotchkiss Memorial Training Facility. This facility was built, they broke ground in 1938. 1938, they broke ground. It took 3 years to build this amazing facility. It's 90,000 square feet on 6 acres of property. 1941, it opened. It opened up for a naval and a marine, a training center. At that time, it put over 100,000 military members through this facility for World War II. As World War II continued, it ended. It was over 250,000 members that came through this facility. And in the 90s, when it started to 1986 is when they actually made this a historical facility. In the mid-90s, we took it over. In 1980, a very tragic incident happened when the LAFD responded to a structure fire here at Frank Hotchkiss. And on the second floor, one of our members who was doing roof operations on the roof went through the roof and was found on the second floor in room 235. If you like to go visit, memorialize Frank, there's a plaque up there with his memorial. But through Frank's passing, we in the LAFD talk about the incident, number one, to honor Frank, and two, so it never happens again. And you guys have heard that if you cross country, it's not a good thing coming off of a main beam. So through Frank's passing, he's saving a lot of lives. We honor Frank with his memory by attaching it to this building. And I think this is what the amazing part of the fire tradition is. Frank will never go down in vain. His death is not going to go in vain. So please, if you like, second floor, that's where we honor Frank. Our first floor, if you go through the hallways, you'll see about 67 members of the LAFD that came to work. They didn't go home. How come they didn't go home? Well, we have a lot of dangers. When we talked about the inherent dangers in our careers. And we have another one, which is called lithium-ion batteries and electric vehicles. These incidents are dangerous. And we need to start immersing ourselves in these situations. We have a lot of incidents. We've had several here in Los Angeles. We've had several amongst your departments because I read about them. Sacramento, a car fire, a regular car fire, wind shifted. It took several members out. 2 members are still off duty. This is crazy. We, as professional, responsible firefighters, we take care of ourselves by learning the trends, finding out where the gaps are within our careers, and we fix it, or at least try to fix it. Today, these discussions, which we would like for you guys to ask a lot of questions. If you don't understand something, we want you to ask questions. We have 2 microphones for you guys to do that. But we brought the best for all of us to learn. We have the FSRI, Dr. Dan Madrikowski. He's a good friend. I've had the opportunity to meet Dan in 2015 when he came in and gave a class to the IAFF Fireground Survival Program. And me and Dan were in 100% disagreement on how to go about business. I'm a traditionalist. I like to do things a certain way, the way I was taught, the way I've seen my experience, but I was missing something. I was missing the educational piece, and don't let the research scare you. We're firefighters. We don't get scared. We get concerned. So don't let it concern you, because I think after I got over myself, I had to do a deep dive in research, and I started learning a lot more and becoming a better firefighter because I was actually accepting it and implementing it where my experience told me would be the best fit. This is why we're here, because the FSRI has a lot of great stuff for you to learn, and we want you to ask questions. We also have Rich Thompson. He's one of ours from LAFD, 19 years of experience. He's got several years in the JHAT program, which that's his job, is to keep the LAFD safe. He immerses himself. He goes to classes. A lot of experience with incidents. And they're both here to give you some of that experience and some of that educational part that we need. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Dan Madrikowski and Captain 2, Rich Thompson.
All right, good morning. My name is, like Andy said, my name is Rich Thompson. I'm a captain here with Los Angeles City Fire Department. 19 years with the fire service, majority here with LA City Fire Department. My current assignment, I am the hazmat program coordinator for the LAFD, where we also manage 4 hazmat teams, as well as we have a state Cal-AS hazmat team that in charge of responding up and down the state for hazmat materials response. And they were also responded to the Palisades incident, where they kind of managed some of the lithium-ion battery issues there. Within my shop, we have a slew of individuals that sit on multiple work groups, seminars, conferences where we teach and talk about this stuff throughout the state and across the country. And we even host some seminars here. I'm really excited to have you guys here. It's important that we talk about the topics. We hopefully got a great presentation here to meet all your guys' needs, your wants, your questions, your curiosities. And if we don't get those, please ask those questions when we have the opportunity before you guys leave here today. And if you guys take anything from today, if it's only one thing that I can stress to you guys, is when we're responding to lithium-ion battery incidents, please wear your PPEs, be on SCBA, protect your airways, protect your bodies. We have a long career to go with this, and this technology is not going anywhere. The amount of exposure, which hopefully we'll show today, is only going to increase. So, Dan? Oh, I'm sorry, real quick. Sorry, I forgot this slide. How we even got here and why it's increased. At least here in the state of California, there's significant legislative measures that passed to clean up some of the zero emissions here in the state of California. One of them being, if you're not aware, by 2035, all auto sales here in the state of California have to be 100% zero emission. So that means it's going to be some sort of alternative fuel source. And because electricity is the most abundant fuel source throughout the state of California, it's going to lead to obviously the increase of electric vehicles. Here in LA, if you're not familiar, there's also a slew of clean air initiatives that have been put in place here in the city to also expedite that process. You got the zero emission roadmap, the electric master vehicle plan here. Every city vehicle for LA City members, every city vehicle here in the city of Los Angeles is going to be alternative fuels, electric being the leader in that. As well as in the Port of Los Angeles, they have the Clean Action Air Plan, where every piece of equipment that operates within the port or even comes in and out of the port has to be an alternative fuels vehicle, which in turn is going to increase our response measures and increase our exposure to possibly electric vehicles. And lastly, the Los Angeles World Airports, same thing there. Every piece of equipment that's going to operate on that airport has to be an alternative fuels vehicle. And right now, EV is the front runner in that.
Good morning. I'm Dan Madrikowski. I'm the Senior Director of Research with the UL Research Institute's Fire Safety Research Institute, FSRI. I've been burning things for a living for about 40 years. I previously led the Advanced Firefighting Technology Group at the National Institute of Standards. And we looked at things from impact of ventilation on fires, wind impacted fires, fire dynamics and structures, and now how our use of electricity is changing our lives for the good, and some of the challenges that that brings along with it. You've probably heard of Underwriters Laboratory, or UL, and there's actually three components to that enterprise. One is the UL Research Institutes, which I work for. That is the core Underwriters Laboratory Incorporated, founded in 1894. And it was founded, our first laboratory was actually in the upstairs loft of a Chicago fire department in 1894. And the reason it started that year is that was a big year for the electrification of America. They had a worldwide expo in Chicago showcasing all these inventions that used electricity for heating homes, for ironing, personal conveniences like curling irons or cooking appliances, toasters, electric fry pans. Needless to say, when these new electrical appliances were rolled out, they caused a lot of fires. People didn't understand quite how to design them. As a result, Underwriters Laboratory developed performance standards for these kind of devices to be tested to. And over the ensuing 100 years or so, those devices became safer to use, safer for the public to use, and caused fewer fires. Today, we're kind of in the re-electrification of America. We're looking at how we handle energy differently. Energy demands are up. So as a result, we need to store energy for peak use periods, resulting in the need for battery energy storage systems. We want to run our cars off electricity for a cleaner, more sustainable environment. The construction industry went from electrically corded tools to pneumatic tools, and now basically to portable electrical power tools overnight. It's a lot of batteries to charge on a construction site. Our phones, our laptops, all powered by lithium-ion batteries. We use it every day. So we conduct research in the research institutes, as the name says, and then that research supports the development of standards by another portion of our company, UL Standards and Engagement. And they develop the performance standards that the appliances or the products would be tested to. And then that testing is done by the UL Solutions, the for-profit part of the company. And that's mainly what funds our existence in the non-for-profit and enables us to do the work to serve the fire service and give that information away to you freely. In my team, we have 5 different research priority areas. First and foremost, firefighter health and safety. That's the core of everything we do. Then we use fire modeling, or the development or understanding of materials and the fire behavior of materials, to get a sense of how that interacts in your world when you go to fight a fire or respond to a fire. Fire dynamics to better understand where we can use the modeling to help design buildings better, but also in many cases for an after action report for the fire department to try to get insight into what happened, what went wrong, as well as what went right. Wildland urban interface. How can we stop building to building fire spread, or at least reduce the potential for building to building fire spread? So we're doing research on window types, window frames, siding materials, to try to get a better understanding of what it takes to ignite it and how much it can resist that building to building fire spread once a urban conflagration starts. Battery fire safety, our main discussion point today. And data science, including the development of NERIS, which is the National Emergency Response Information System. It's going to replace NFIRS officially at the end of the year. We currently have several thousand departments already reporting. I believe there's over 350,000 calls that have been logged into the system. and we're having more and more departments log in and start recording every day. So by January 1st, there should be a complete turnover nationwide. Needless to say, as we talk about the research that we've done today, this isn't my research. I'm honored to be involved in it, but I've got people, about 45 in number, across these research priority areas. And we're using people in the firefighter health and safety program to assist with the battery fire safety program to understand the exposures to firefighters and turnout gear and cleaning the gear and things of that nature. So there's basically experts and research engineers from across all these priority areas that are working on battery fire safety. One way we share our results, certainly we write peer-reviewed journal articles for the academics and the scientists to assure that we're giving you quality information and information that can be trusted and is state of the art. But we also take that information and turn it into training programs for the fire service. So they're free programs. Over the course of the presentation today, I'll show several QR codes for different training programs that you might be interested if you want to take a deeper dive into lithium-ion batteries and things like that. You can get access to the 32 programs we have at training.fsri.org. And just last week, we released a resource library. And so what the resource library is for, it's all sorts of videos and animations that are part of our full-length training courses. So if you want to take just a bit of that video or that animation and put it as part of your training, you're certainly welcome to download it and do so. Initially, we were kind of set up for Captain Thompson and I to speak separately. And we thought about it a little bit, and this is sort of the core of our mission at FSRI. And that is, how do we help the fire service? Well, we do research and we develop a certain body of knowledge doing that research. But again, we're doing research in a lab, maybe in an acquired structure, and that fully doesn't represent your experience when you're responding in the middle of the night. So it's important to take your experience that you have and put it together with the knowledge that we're sharing with you to really understand what's going on and make it sink. If there's something that we're saying up here that doesn't match or align with your experience, that's important for us to know. Maybe we need to do additional research. Maybe we need to better understand what the issues that you're having are to address them. But truly, if you want to be more effective on the fire ground, bringing that knowledge and your experience together and understanding that is sort of the best path forward.
So today, the agenda we have lined out for you guys is death by PowerPoint, and I apologize. But in the afternoon, you guys will get a little more hands-on with products. But a lot of good information, like Dan said, through his shop. They've done a tremendous amount of research to provide the data to you guys for us to take back in the fire service. And like he said, how are we going to apply that to reality now? How are we going to achieve that? So we're going to give you guys a brief overview. Basically, what we've had here in LA City, we've had a significant amount of lithium-ion battery incidents and some of the biggest ones across the country. So we'll talk about that, as well as Dan will reference the FDNY. They've also had a slew of incidents and some changes they've made. We'll talk about the global impact and really how it's going to drive this industry and in turn increasing our exposure to these incidents. We'll talk about how the risk associated and how are we going to manage that risk? How are we going to go ahead and conquer these in the future? We'll talk about some of the characterizations. We'll talk about the incident operation considerations and on scene. And hopefully we have enough time, even though this is just lithium-ion battery and EV, we can get into the battery energy storage systems and talk about some of the stuff that we're seeing with the transportation world. So why are we here? We're here because it has been a growing industry, as we all know, which in turn has had a growing exposure. And you're going to find these all over the place. We're definitely finding them all over the place, in places that we didn't even expect to find them to begin with. This one here was a battery energy storage pack inside this trailer on a movie shoot. The entire trailer was filled with these energy storage packs. We're finding them in commercial buildings. We'll talk about this incident a little bit later, but this EV was sitting inside of a 2-story office building as a static display. Energy storage systems. You have the industrial made ones, but then you're going to have the homemade ones. We just had this one, I think 2 weeks ago. It was a 20-foot Conex container filled with lithium-ion batteries that was used for an energy storage system at a private site. And they were just trying to move it from one location to the next. So we're going to find them on the roadway. Heavy equipment. This one was at a rental yard. Brand new piece of equipment that went into runaway sitting at the rental yard. If you aren't aware, every light duty equipment, heavy duty equipment is going to an alternative fuel source and going to become electrical, is being the popular. And lastly is the transportation. You're going to have the car carriers on the road. You're going to come across unique challenges. You're going to come across where it's not in the everyday environment that we're used to. Locomotives, if you didn't know, the railroad is going full electric. Ships are looking into it. There is even autonomous electric vehicle, helicopters. You name it, this stuff is getting into the transportation world, the energy storage world, and in turn is going to cause us some issues if we're not prepared for it. This video here is a demonstration here in Southern California. The fire companies that respond to it, they were just responding to an auto fire, did not know it was an electric truck. It was one of the first ones that we've been exposed to here in Southern California. And I just want you guys to see just the intensity that these incidents have and what we're up against. There's the flames that are coming off that truck. Not a typical auto fire force showing up on scene. And as we talk about more and more incidents throughout the presentation today, I want you guys to factor that in. They're not our typical incidents anymore. We don't know if there's going to be a lithium-ion battery in there. What we do know is we can be prepared and try to position ourselves to be successful in the future for our fire service.
So on the other side of the country, FDNY has been having some challenges of its own with lithium-ion batteries. And they asked UL to help partner with them and get a better understanding of it. In many cases, they were having fires in high-rise buildings, and they came to understand that there were multiple scooters in each of these fires, typically charging or piled by the entry door. They became to learn that that was people's side gigs, so to speak, where they would get an app on their phone. They could collect the commercial scooters that were laying on the sidewalk and bring them back to their apartment, charge them, and replace them back on the street the next day and get paid for charging it. They call them juicers. So they're starting to address that. Recently, just earlier this year in July, there was a delivery driver for a pizza restaurant, and they came in the back door and parked their scooter in the hallway in the rear of the restaurant, which was in the same hallway where the bathrooms were. And a grandma had been in the restaurant with her family, and they were enjoying a nice lunch, and she went into the bathroom, and unfortunately the timing was such that the scooter exploded outside the bathroom door, and she was unable to exit and succumbed to her injuries. So these things, we didn't even know about them in 2012. They're not that old, but by 2015, hoverboards, there were over 2.5 million of them in the United States. And what you see is they could catch fire, and as the batteries explode, they can eject and spread fire around the room. For this initial set of hoverboards that caught our attention, many of them caught fire, and many of them were recalled by the Consumer Product Safety Commission. Some of them, Amazon stopped selling in the early days. So they certainly got our attention. Since then, UL has developed standards for these type of devices. But again, it's optional. So you can buy a device that has been tested and meets the standard, or you can buy likely a lower cost device that hasn't. So from 2019 through 2023, you could see the progression in the number of fires from 30 to 268, the increase in injuries from 13 to 150, the increase in deaths from 0 to 18, increase in structural fires, and increase in non-structural fires. Here's an example of the kind of some of the fires that they were
This is
experiencing in
an
New York.
extraordinary amount of damage from this single bike that you can see here to my left. This call came in around 10:41 a.m. this morning. We are still here fighting this fire. We have over 50 units, fire and EMS on scene. We have over 200 members.
Our response time was less than 4 minutes. We quickly stretched a hose line into the building and started to extinguish the fire. The amount of fire that is produced by a single battery in just under 5 minutes we were unable to get ahead of it. It had spread quickly into the void spaces of the building and took off from there. It was a difficult operation. We quickly went to a defensive operation. You see these tower ladders. We stopped the fire from spreading to the furniture store, but the fire had already spread to the laundromat.
There is extraordinary damage. This entire building behind me is completely destroyed. The roof is caved in. There is nothing left. And it is all because of this one single bike. And so we really want to emphasize to the public how much damage can be done by a single bike, but I think that this shows how really dangerous this is to our members, to the public.
The e-bike fire, it's so much force behind it so quickly. Like I said, under 5 minutes, we already were putting water on that e-bike fire, and it had already spread throughout the building. It's really something that we have never seen before, as far as a small fire turning into something like this in a matter of a few minutes.
So here's the security camera footage of the start of that fire. A store employee brought their e-scooter to work. They plugged it in to charge it while they were on shift. It caught fire in the storeroom. They were trying to remove it and were unsuccessful. And then we were able to here see the fire develop very rapidly. So the result of these fires caused New York City to pass a new ordinance, a new local law that requires any company that's selling, leasing, or distributing micromobility devices such as electric bikes or electric scooters to meet certain safety standards, such as those published by ULSE. And there's a list of them. And not only did they pass the law, but they've been enforcing the law. So New York City has had this, been a precursor with the lithium-ion battery scooter fires, in part because there's such a business there of food delivery drivers, package delivery drivers going across the city. And in many cases, these drivers, as part of their daily work shift, will go through 2 or 3 battery charges. As a result, there are shops set up around the city to assist these drivers and help them swap batteries, in some cases, building additional battery packs on site and things of that nature. So again, batteries that haven't been inspected or tested. What they did with enforcement is they went out to these shops, and if they had batteries that did not have a UL or a ETL or a recognized third-party testing organization legitimate label, they confiscated those products. They would return to those shops again, and if they found a similar activity going on, not only did they confiscate the products, then they arrested the owners. And that really sent the message, and it's having some impact. Are there less fires? No, as of last year. The fires continue to go up, but the increase has not been as great as previously. The number of injuries have gone down. The number of deaths have gone down. I believe this year so far, the number of deaths continue to go down, thankfully. It's interesting that there seems to be a shift from the number of structure fires versus the number of non-structure fires. So maybe there's some warnings being heeded about where to charge your device or store your device and not have it in your home.
Okay, so like we mentioned earlier, you're gonna find these things in your every day. They're in our cell phones, they're in our laptops, they're in charging stations, your power tools in your garage, even at home, on the fire trucks, some, even in some of the fire stations. So what does the future look for us? And just trying to give you guys, once again, just that global overview of the amount of exposure that's gonna be there. EV auto sales, back in 2001, there was only 3 million on the roadway. And because of the push of alternative fuels, by 2035, 10 years from now, just shy of 80 million vehicles will be sold as electric vehicles that are going to be on the roadway. And like I mentioned earlier, with that bill that was passed here in the state of California, 100% of the vehicles by that time are going to be some sort of alternative force, alternative fuel, sorry, and electric vehicles being the main source. E-scooters, 1.2 million just last year. In 5 years from now, you're looking at tripling that number of e-scooters that are going to be inside these residences, inside these apartment buildings, in your rubbish fires, in the garages. Once again, California being the front runner with just shy of 500,000 units being sold. E-bikes, 1.7 million last year. By 2030, 6 to 7 times that amount. They're going to be in the homes, in the garages, in, once again, maybe some of your rubbish fires, auto fires, even for that matter. Worldwide, UL Solutions has been doing a great job of trying to track some of this data. Since they started tracking, just shy of 16,000 incidents globally have been reported, with 3,100 of those just alone in 2024. The leading consumer products, obviously, is the laptops. The next one is the e-mobility devices. And then third, just because there's not as many on the roadways and being exposed, but then the EV vehicles. Of those 15 to 16,000, 14,000 of those were fire-related incidents. And of those 14,000 fire-related incidents, 6,000 of those led to injuries globally to the on scene, and 464 deaths. So it's important that we understand this, we take the appropriate steps to not only try to prevent them, but that we build solid SOGs and SOPs to mitigate this and make sure everybody goes home safely.
So we're going to take a little step back and just look at today's fire environment. If you've been looking at this kind of information, you'll see for the past 10 to 15 years, there's been discussions about how houses and buildings are getting larger. There's discussions about the fuels that are in the buildings have a higher heat release rate and basically can create a bigger hazard. The buildings that are built are large span buildings in many cases, whether they're commercial or residential. When we are using solid lumber, in many cases, if you're just using a solid lumber joist, you were limited to the span between walls for structural walls being 12, maybe 16 feet. Now in homes, you may want to span 25 feet or 30 feet. And the way they do that is with engineered joists. In many cases, these are lightweight engineered lumber joists. What that means is that we've replaced mass with math. And so when it's attacked by fire, it fails much sooner. Houses are built closer together in many cases, leading to this building to building fire spread that we discussed earlier. And again, we're trying to figure out different ways to use energy and collect energy. So in many cases, energy now, we want to harvest it from the sun with solar panels. We may want to harvest it from the wind with a wind turbine in the backyard, a small wind turbine in the backyard. And if we have that energy coming in, we need some place to store it. And that place might be a residential battery energy storage system that might be located in the garage or some other portion of the house that is not considered a livable space. All these things lead to faster fire development, faster collapse times, and some new and unknown hazards that you typically are discovering for the first time. So something that we've known for a while is as we changed from natural materials in our home, cotton, wool, horsehair, things like that, and went to synthetics such as polyurethane foam, polyester batting, polyester microfiber, which are the three components in the synthetic sofa. From a similar open flame ignition, you can see that the fire behavior, the fire spread, the fire growth rate is very, very different with the synthetic material. Why do we call it synthetic? Because it doesn't occur in nature. It's synthesized, typically from petroleum products. Is it useful? Yes, it's lightweight, low density. In some cases, hypoallergenic. It keeps its shape. It doesn't need steel springs to keep its shape like the cotton sofa that grandma used to have. However, the fire performance is very, very different. Grandma's sofa will burn for more than an hour before it self-extinguishes. Here's a look at the heat release rate comparison. The cotton sofa never gets above 300 kilowatts. Now, if it's in a room of other furnishings, will that drive a room to flashover? Absolutely, but it's going to take some time. When we look at the synthetic sofa heat release rate, that goes up as a peak heat release rate within 3 minutes of 5,000 kilowatts or 5 megawatts. The amount of energy that you need to flash over a residential scale room with an open door is about 2 megawatts. So that 100-pound sofa has more than twice the energy that you need to flash over the room all by itself. How many times do you go to a fire in a residential occupancy that only has a single sofa in the room and no other fuel? Almost never, right? There's carpeting, there's other upholstered furniture. What that means is you're working in a fuel-rich environment in a residential, in a typical residential structure fire. To save a little bit on time, we have set up flashover cells, and we videoed this to show a room that has hardwood floors, wool carpet, cotton, and solid wood furniture in it compared to synthetics. And the synthetic transitions to flashover in less than between 3 and 5 minutes. Every time, the natural may take from 25 minutes to 40 minutes to transition to flashover. So if you want to take a picture of the QR code and look at that during lunch on your phone, I encourage you to do so. So what's the change? The change is in the chemistry of the material itself, the heat of combustion, the amount of energy that it can release when it's burning. So for wood, we're releasing 12 to 15 megajoules per kilogram. Polyurethanes can be anywhere from 20 to 30 megajoules of energy per kilogram. And gasoline, typically we use a number of 43.7 megajoules per kilogram. To simplify that a little bit, a pound of gasoline has 3 times the amount of potential energy when it's burning as a pound of wood does. And then we have the synthetics running the gamut in between, anywhere from 1.5 to 2 times the amount of energy that we might have in a pound of wood. So the fire service has been traditionally taught that you have a fire that has an ignition, it grows, it may flash over to be fully developed or not, and then it'll go into decay as the fuel runs out or suppression water is applied. It was only about 15 years ago that the standard training manuals started to discuss this thing called ventilation limited fire, where if you have a house that's well insulated and the windows don't fail as the fire starts to develop, you could have a situation where the fire ignites, it grows, it may start to transition a flashover, but then run out of the oxygen that's stored in the home, drops the oxygen level below 15%, so the flames go out, the heat release rate goes out, goes down, the temperature of the gases go down, the gases contract, so the pressure in the house goes down, and the pressure in the house can actually be lower than the atmospheric pressure. And what that means is when you show up, you see nothing. You might see some signs of smoke where it had pushed out around a door crack in a door frame or around a window frame, but when you arrive, there's nothing showing. But the house is full of gaseous fuel and heat. All it needs is oxygen to regrow. So opening a door, breaking a window may cause that fire to respond somewhat violently and rapidly and transition a flashover. Let's take a look at an example. In this case, we have smoke showing. Notice the glow as soon as the window's taken. And within seconds, we have flames out the window. Why do flames extend out of a window? Because there's not enough oxygen inside the compartment to allow those gases to burn. So we got to a point where we said, wow, fire growth has really sped up. The rate of fire spread has sped up. We've gone from 30 minutes to flash over a room down to less than 5 minutes to flash over a room with synthetic furnishings. Well, now let's look at the situation we have with an e-scooter that's being intentionally overcharged. We see a little bit of smoke. We see more smoke as the batteries vent. And then a rapid transition. Effectively, a low-grade explosion and a rapid transition of flashover as other items in the room are ignited. That starts to make the rapid growth of the synthetic furnishings pale in comparison. Now we're going from 0 to flashover potentially in less than a minute. So this likely would happen before your arrival. The challenge is there only one battery and one scooter in that apartment? Are there other batteries that are now being exposed to that heat? And will they start to vent and or explode basically when you're arriving or making entry? So again, what caused this change? Well, the reason we use lithium-ion batteries is because they're able to store more energy. In a way that polyurethane foam stored more energy than wood, the lithium-ion batteries can store much more energy than a lead-acid battery or alkaline battery. And the future of growth and how much energy they will be able to store per their size keeps increasing. That's the idea, right? We want to have longer service life in our phone, in our laptop, scooters, and of course, longer distance to travel in the cars. So if for whatever reason, due to damage, due to a product failure, due to abuse of the product, if all that energy is released at one time, as you saw in the last video, it can be explosive.
So with that, in the changing the fire environment, like that video showed, full flashover with the e-mobility device in that room was 30 seconds compared to 4 minutes. And if your agency, typically a lot of agencies I talk to, they have an incident management clock, whether it's 10 minutes, 12 minutes, 15 minutes. So now, when does that clock start? And when is it, when is it safe to be in there still? When should we consider maybe a different tactic or objective? And these are the things that are impacting our environment. And that's important to take that information that Dan just talked about and start thinking about how's that going to change our risk management policy moving forward. So risk management, what does risk management mean? Everybody has a definition for it. Every agency has a different definition for it. For me, at the end of the day, it's not the fear of the worst, but it's the preparation for the possible. And that's what we're doing here today. So what does that look like? What is another example? Well, just like when we go on camping trips back at home with our families, we don't just grab snacks, get in the car, and head out and hope for the best, right? We prepare ourselves for success for that trip. We're going to make sure our tires and our car is working in proper conditions. We're going to bring a map just in case our GPS or our cell phone coverage goes down. We're going to grab a first aid kit for good measures. We're always in the habit of asking ourselves at home, what could possibly go wrong? And how can I make sure that everything goes to success? And that's what we should be doing here. And that's why you guys are here today. And that's why I'm excited to have you guys. So what are the risks associated with lithium-ion batteries? The graphic here pretty much lists everything that we have to try to combat and reduce on scene of an incident. Whether it's thermal runaway, toxic gases, continuous reignition, ventilation issue, explosive properties, respiratory issues, health effects, electrocution, toxic runoff. The list could go on and on and on that we're exposed to during these incidents that we have to navigate through these. So how are we going to do that? We're going to do that through the 4 things that we're going to here provide you guys today. We're going to go through education piece. We're going to start talking about these batteries and start giving you guys a little background, a little bit more further data to help you make good, solid, educated decision making on scene and when you're back at home with your departments. We're going to do it through pre-fire planning, understanding what your challenges are in your district and where are they. We're going to talk about how to develop an SOP and an SOG regarding lithium-ion batteries. And lastly, give you some training recommendations of what you can incorporate moving forward to prepare your fire departments. So let's talk about batteries. The 3 style of battery cells that are out there currently right now are cylindrical, prismatic, and pouch. Just depending on what the energy storage is needed dictates what style of battery is going to be in those devices. Cylindrical and prismatic Cylindrical is the one, looks like a little AA battery, just a little bit extra larger. Sometimes they're a little bit larger size. You'll sometimes hear them referred to as 18650s or 21700s. Those batteries there have a vent port on top, which is designed to off gas when it starts to build up temperature inside. Worst case scenario, if it does decide to light off, it's also designed to go out that vent port, and like a jet-like flame will come off the top of that battery. The same thing will happen with prismatics. Prismatics is the one that's in the center there. What I compare it to is looks like an external hard drive of a computer. It has a vent port on top, once again, designed to keep it from swelling and ballooning and pressure building up inside, and it'll allow the off-gassing to take place or flame to come out of it. The last one there is the pouch cell. The pouch cell is like a reference, basically a foil bag. A Ziploc baggie, imagine that, and it's just all made of foil, all one component. The difference between and what makes the prismatic the most hazardous in a sense is because the cylindrical and the prismatics have a metal casing to try to keep it together, try to keep it from rupturing. Where the pouch cells, like I said, it's like a baggie. As soon as it gets punctured, the whole battery is now an issue and you got a violent effect. So the chemistry in the batteries, how are they made up internally? They all have the same three components. You have a cathode, you have an anode, and you have the electric light in there, and then a little barrier that separates both the cathodes and the anodes. And the chemistry that's inside those batteries is what creates the health effects for us and creates the environments that we're entering into. So let's talk about the cathodes, the inner core of the battery. Inside there, it's made up of three different types of metals and material. You have cobalt ion, you have, the next one you could have is nickel, magnesium, cobalt, and the lastly is you can have lithium iron phosphate. The cobalt, the cobalt ion, you're going to find those in electronic devices, stuff like that. They burn hot. They produce HF as well. The nickel, magnesium, cobalt, you'll find those in EVs. You'll find those particularly in e-mobility devices as well. And those are the ones that are our challenges because those batteries, during the decomposition of the electrolytes in there, it creates that oxygen environment. And that oxygen that's getting released is what causes that intense fire growth, that prolonged burning event that takes place, which then in turn requires absorbent amount of water to be applied and with a long, prolonged extinguishment. The metals that are in these things. Actually, we'll talk about more the metals here in a second.
So as you saw, despite the type of battery construction, they have some commonalities: a cathode, an anode, electrolyte, and a separator. However, what makes lithium-ion batteries a little different from some other batteries is that the cathode, the electrolyte, and the separator are combustible. Something to clarify: lithium metal is not equivalent to lithium ions. Lithium ions are salts. So lithium metal, you may remember from a demonstration you've seen somewhere, if you drop a piece of lithium metal into water, it is highly reactive. It will immediately start to smoke. There'll be a rapid ignition and fire. Lithium ions do not react to water that way. That's why it's okay to put water on a lithium ion battery. We can immerse lithium ions in water. There's no smoke, no fire. So it's important to know there are lithium metal batteries. They're older typically, but they're still around. So that's something to try to clarify. Lithium ion is not equivalent to lithium metal. Thermal runaway. So as you learned early on in your firefighting career, there's different types of energy, right? We have thermal energy, chemical energy, nuclear energy, those sorts of things, different forms. And what the battery does is basically stores electrical energy as chemical energy. And in order to get it back to electrical energy, it needs to go through a chemical reaction. One of the products of that chemical reaction is the generation of heat So as electricity is either put into the battery or taken out of the battery, there's going to be a temperature rise within the battery. And if the flow of energy increases, then that temperature rise is going to increase. And in turn, that increased temperature is going to cause the chemical reaction to go even faster. That's why these batteries typically need to be used with a battery management system. So if you have a 20 volt battery on your drill, it'll typically have 10 cells in it. Each cell is able to produce 3.7 volts of electricity. Part of the reason you have more cells in it is it may not be using all the batteries at one time. So if some of the batteries start to get hot, the battery management system switches over to another set of batteries, and that's how they keep the batteries within a certain operating temperature. Ideally, they'd like to keep them for optimal performance between 80 and 120 degrees Fahrenheit. If there is no battery management system, or if the battery management system fails and you have a heavy draw on that battery, you could drive it into thermal runaway. Or you could be overcharging the battery. If you have a mismatch of charger versus your battery pack, you could drive it into thermal runaway due to overcharging. It could also go into thermal runaway due to damage, basically shorting it out. If you drive a piece of metal through a lithium ion battery, you'll short it out and cause it to spark and burst into flame if it has a high state of charge. So there are many ways that it can go into thermal runaway. And if you're interested in learning more about that, here's one of the free classes that I was speaking about, which will tell you a little bit about the science of lithium ion batteries. So here's a couple of videos from that course. In this case, we've got a battery that's at a 30% state of charge and a battery at 100% state of charge. And we've got them both in an oven, and we're going to drive them into thermal runaway by heating them up. So in the first case, we see we have some smoke coming off the 30% state of charge battery. It's generating some heat enough that it's glowing, but we don't see any flame. We don't see any sparks. We don't see any explosion. And again, that's because it's only storing 30% of the capacity of the energy that it could store. Let's look at the battery that's fully charged at 100% state of charge. A more energetic reaction, right? Because it has more energy to release. So we saw sparks, we saw part of the case explode, if you will, and then flames come out of it. So as we see that smoke coming out of the batteries, what's coming out? So in a nickel cobalt aluminum battery, NCA, about 30% of that is hydrogen. Another 15% of that is a combination of other types of hydrocarbons, other fuels. About 26% is carbon monoxide, and about 29% is carbon dioxide. If we go to a lithium iron phosphate type battery, you'll notice that almost 50% of the gas that comes out of it when it goes into thermal runaway is hydrogen. So remember the Hindenburg, very flammable, very combustible. We have another 20% that are a combination of other hydrocarbons that can burn, 11% carbon monoxide, and about 20% carbon dioxide.
Okay, so understanding now the makeup of these batteries and the state of charge and how that plays a factor will impact our health effects on scene of these incidents. Listed here are the gases that are some of the more common gases that we found through studies and on scene of incidents that are exposing our members. HF is obviously being the main component, the main hot topic when it comes to these type of incidents. HF is a gas that's produced during the decomposition of the electrolytes, and a long-term exposure to HF can cause significant health risks. It can lead to pulmonary edema or inflammation. It could lead to dermal burns on your skin, or after a long-term exposure or a high rate of exposure, it can lead to systematic toxicity. Now, HF is, like I said, it comes off the electrolyte during the decomposition phase. And as the studies are tested, it's really hard to kind of measure how much HF is in that environment that we're entering into. And that's because it's a sticky substance. It wants to stick when it gets released. It wants to start to stick into our turnouts. It wants to start sticking to other materials inside that environment. So it's a challenge to find it. It's also a lot of the studies that I've done and in a lot of the environments that we enter into, typically HF is coming out of the batteries at the initial stages of the event taking place in the battery. That venting port that I was talking about a little earlier. So a lot of it, through what they found, is that gas gets released early on because what happens is, like I said, it's the decomposition of the electrolyte in the battery, which happens at a low temperature inside it. So it's off-gassing, 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 then it goes into runaway, at which then now the other gases are kind of taking over that component. So it is a hard gas to measure, but it is there and it does cause a significant amount of health effects to us. Hydrogen, another byproduct of the electrolyte in that battery. The electrolyte produces a lot of the flammability and the explosive gases that come into that environment. We're going to talk about that and kind of show some examples down the road, but hydrogen, if you don't know, is a very explosive gas. You don't need much. 4% to 75% is actually the explosive range of hydrogen in an environment. And when we have those in a confined space, in an enclosed environment, it leads to an explosion possibly taking place, and we're going to talk about that a little bit next few slides down. The metals that we're looking at, the hydrogen cyanide and the CO, those are registered at relatively low levels on scene of what we're finding so far and through case studies. CO is another one that's kind of hard to delineate on scene, and that's because if you want to really get into the hazmat world, CO readings, you may take your 4 or 5 gas meter inside these environments, and you may get significant high readings of CO in this environment going, wow, there's a lot of carbon monoxide in here. But actually what you also could be reading is the HF in that environment. The HF, that sensor, that CO sensor, it's considered what we call cross sensitivity in the hazmat world and can be giving you a false positive or a false reading in that environment. So is it a good indicator that you're working with lithium ion battery? Sure. Is it a good indicator that there's possibly HF in that environment? Absolutely. But is it actually telling you what you're truly dealing with in that environment? No. So you would need a specific sensor to separate both the CO and the HF in that environment. So it's something to think about. The heavy metals, nickel, cobalt, and magnesium, and Dan's team here will show you exactly some of those levels that they found through their case studies. But these are the heavier metals that are found and the more common ones found throughout the studies. And these are the ones that are going to cause the most damage to us as firefighters moving forward. We already kind of talked about how the HF will cause respiratory issues, and overexposure to these heavy metals will do the same. They'll cause significant respiratory irritability. We hear about it all the time on some of the exposures and some of the firefighter injuries across the country. They're experiencing a lot of the similar symptoms. Same thing with cobalt. And manganese, that's the one that worries me the most. At a high level exposure, a significant amount of exposure to manganese, depending on the environment, the chemistry, goes back to that education piece, understanding what our problems, understanding how these batteries are made. A heavy dose of manganese exposure can lead to severe respiratory issues. Also, it crosses the blood-brain barrier and can lead to then cognitive issues. It could lead to tremors. It could lead to cognitive impairment. If you have an inhalation and you start to get into systematic toxicity of a metal, overexposure to those metals, and it'll start attacking your heart and your kidneys, leading to anemia, leading to hypertension. And what some cases, and we haven't been able to prove it because there's just not enough science out there, there's a handful of firefighters after lithium-ion battery incidents and exposure to them leading to renal failure and getting medically retired. So something to think about as we're doing these exposures. Like I talked about at the beginning of my opening statement, one thing you take home today is protection. That's wearing your full PPEs and SCBA to try to protect your respiratory, because that's the main hazard with these things as we move forward. To dive a little more into the HF then, because it's always a hot topic. And we talked about that state of charge and how that made a difference with the thermal runaway. It's the same thing here. As you can see, depending on the state of charge, the color codes dictates what state of charge it was. And a good rule of thumb, basically, if it's over 50%, you're going to have a high release of HF initially at the incident because it's heating up faster, just like that video showed. That HF is getting released immediately at the beginning, and then it goes into runaway, and now you're having that drop in HF in that environment. And the parts per million, as you see there, Parts per million, once again, it's kind of hard to gauge that in the environments that we're going into. Yes, this test was able to kind of concentrate it in their little data study, but the environment we're going into, it's going to be more challenging. Because like I said, that HF is going to want to stick to our turnouts. It's going to want to stick to the surfaces inside the units that we're entering into. But just to give you an idea of how toxic HF is, the EPA has these, they're called acute guideline exposure limits. And if you're not familiar with them, there's 3 different stages of them: stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. And in order of being the least severe, stage 1, the most severe is stage 3. And if you heard of it, it's AGEL 3. And what 3 is a lethal dose that you could be exposed to in the hazmat world. Well, for HF, the studies that they've done to reach AG 3 is if you're exposed to 170 parts per million, which this study showed got released in the first few minutes of that burn test, for a period of 10 minutes without being on air, you received a lethal dose of HF, and you're looking at significant health issues. You break it down, what'll still keep you in the AGL3? Okay, well, we'll bring that down. Well, if you're in there for 30 minutes, it only is 64 parts per million that you need in that environment for 30 minutes. That'll get you to your lethal dose. And if you break it down even further, if you're in there for an hour doing overhaul and you didn't properly ventilate the area, or you didn't get all the batteries out of the environment before you guys got off air and cleared it okay to be into, if you're in there for an hour, just even at 32 parts per million, which for HF, when you're looking at whether you need to be on a breather per the criteria, the MSD criteria, is only 30 parts per million makes it an ideal H that you need to be on air. So at 32 parts per million, being there for an hour, you're going to consume your lethal dose of HF, which could cause significant health effects down the road. So it's important that, like I said, we understand this chemistry. It's important that we understand the environments we're working on. As we get through this process here and we get through this presentation, how does that play a factor when we're developing our SOPs and SRGs moving forward?
So what we're looking at here is a single cell, an 18650 cell, and it's videoed in slow motion so you could see the gases being released and the jet fire coming off of that single cell. So that might be something that would be in a large vape pen or a personal shave or something like that. And then what we're going to do is increase the number of cells so you could see how the fire starts to spread. These are cells that were put into thermal runaway through overheating, or cell packs where two of the cells were put into thermal runaway due to overheating. And then as the one cell goes into thermal runaway, we could sort of watch the thermal propagation of thermal runaway throughout the pack. You get a sense of the peak heat release rate. When we get to about 10 cells or 30 cells there, a 50 kilowatt fire would be equivalent to, say, having a coffee maker on fire or a small campfire. Flames about, to image a 50 kilowatt fire of a more traditional fuel would be about 1 foot on a side with flames 18 to 2 feet tall. As we get into the 100 cells, so 30 cells might be a stand-on scooter. 100 cells also could be a larger stand-on scooter or an e-bike. We get to 136 or 150 cell packs. Those could be from a sit-on, a ride-on scooter, or perhaps a larger piece of lawn equipment. So it's one thing when these packs discharge and burn in the open and release their gases in the open. So what we've done from these tests in the laboratory is understand the amount of gas that's released, understand the composition of the gas that's released, and then we're going to simulate that gas release in a structure. So one of the structures we used was a 2-car garage. And the reason we chose the garage was because people tend to put their power tool batteries in the garage. Many people might put an e-bike or an e-scooter in the garage. Or if you had a residential battery energy storage system, that might be installed in the garage as well. In addition to the 2-car garage with a gypsum board lining, we attached a hallway around the garage to give it some volume as if it was attached to a house, and put a typical doorway and door in between, let's say what might be a kitchen and the garage itself. So we're looking at the potential for gas from different size batteries. So we have the 10-cell 20-volt battery that might be on a handheld drill or another piece of handheld power equipment. Then we have a larger battery, which would be for a larger piece of lawn equipment like a push mower, something like that. Then we have the electric bike, and then the larger battery capacity is the sit-on e-scooter. So the potential results we get from all the gases evolving from a handheld battery, the 10-cell battery, is a deflection of the door as it's venting some of that pressure. Now we'll go to the other end of the spectrum with the scooter, the sit-on scooter. Yes, well, so these aren't batteries. This is the gas, simulating the gas that would come out of the battery. Yeah. So basically, I believe there's about 8 liters of gas that will come out of a single 18650 cell. So we looked at the degrees of damage based on the different potential sizes of battery. And so in the case with the scooter battery, that door was blown 50 feet away from the garage. It also had the impact of cracking some 2x4s, part of the structural members, destroyed the latch, blew the door open, pushed one of the panels out in the door. And again, as the batteries got smaller, the damage was less to just drywall joint cracking or some evidence of pushing on the latch, but the latch stayed in place to isolate it, have the door maintain the isolation from the garage. For any of these things, it's one thing, as I indicated before, for us to do testing, but we need some kind of reality check. How does this look compared to what's happening in the real world? So in July of 2024, there was an incident where a handheld drill battery exploded, and it basically bent the garage door, had a small fire inside. So again, that reflects the kind of energy release that we saw in our experiments. Here's another incident, another couple incidents. The one in Montreal happened several years before our test, where there was some batteries that exploded and blew the garage door across the street. And then about 6 months, 7 months after we did our test, there was an incident in Colorado. So in the incident in Colorado, there was a hybrid Jeep in the garage, and the fire company responded to it. And there was some miscommunication about where the fire was or where the hazard, the problem was. So they went in through the front door and then entered the garage. And they found the hybrid Jeep full of with the windows up, full of smoke and a glow in the back seat. And as they were attempting to open the door and figure out what to do with this, they had the explosion. Fortunately, the people the firefighters in the garage were not hurt. And fortunately, the firefighter in front of the garage was very swift and bent down, and the garage door did not touch him. It just took his helmet off. So now let's compare that incident to our experiment. So again, it's this combination of real world experience and our test research data to try to put the entire puzzle together and understand and characterize what some of the hazards could be from the lithium ion batteries. So if you're interested in this study and want some more details about the battery and the gases and whatnot, I encourage you to download the study. That QR code will take you to it. There's some images there from a residential battery energy storage system that was installed in a basement in Germany that caused some structural damage. Come to the mic, please.
Good. Can you come to the mic real quick so everybody can hear the question?
just for clarity though, so for your studies, you guys are using concentrated bags that were ignited with the gas instantaneous, right? Whereas typically on the battery failures, you're gonna have that heat release with a little bit of a time interval, right? So have you guys done studies where you're taking that same concentrated gas, but using a heat release that's indicative of a thermal runaway on batteries?
So let me use a mic. So the question was, the gas is going to evolve. And so what we saw is that's why we use different size bags to kind of let that gas evolve and then ignite it. So we would mix the gas in the bag, would recirculate it, and then let it get to the volume in the correct mixture and ignite it. So as you'll see in some upcoming videos with the scooter fires and whatnot, you'll see a similar thing where a couple of cells will go off and then more cells will go off. We have a neutral buoyancy, typically gas that's coming out, and then we'll get an ignition and it will explode. So we're trying to mimic that same phenomena.
Yeah, I would think that, like in the comparison, your studies were showing a scooter battery at, maybe 1.5 kilowatts of storage energy on the high end, compared to the Jeep that's got like 15 or 16 kilowatts, but they're showing the same relationship in damage. And I'm wondering if that has to do with that heat release of the actual batteries versus the gas in the bag.
So in our case, we're assuming that in those battery packs, all the batteries are involved. In the case of the Jeep, my assumption is all the batteries were not involved, right? That just some of them had started to off gas. The fact that it filled a larger volume of the Jeep itself could amplify the impact of the explosion.
Okay, so bringing it back into reality, and just like this demonstration in the garages, does that change our operation? Do we avoid cutting with rotary saws on garage doors when we're looking at a detached garage fire or even attached garage fire? I've seen a lot of companies where we're cutting that on that immediately without identifying what are we working with inside? What is the fuel source? What is the products of combustion that we're dealing with inside? So, real world, just like he was showing from Erie, Colorado, here in LA, we had a similar incident. Companies were responding to early morning call about 5 in the morning, got a report of a structure fire. Upon arrival, they find a 2-story office building with medium white smoke coming out of the alpha side, which is for us the front side of the building. As the company officers do their 360, they come around, they find what in this picture here, what they called the Bravo wall, had structural instability shown there. Continue the 360, the Charlie wall was blown out as well. The rest of the walls were okay on the Delta and the Alpha side. The glass on the Alpha side was even intact. And when they made entry, they gave another updated report of the smoke conditions. We have heavy white, cold smoke in the unit. And then as they got into, they had a sprinkler going and they had an EV being held in check inside this commercial building. So just what I'm trying to paint the picture here is as we talk about strategies and tactics moving forward, I want you guys to think about these explosive properties. And when you're doing your 360, you should probably start thinking about if I got walls blown out, I'm dealing with something else than just your standard typical structure fire. Now, I'm not saying we're not going to make entry, but it should be a red flag when you're starting to make your entry and you're developing your strategies and tactics and your approach to this incident. When it was all said and done, this vehicle that's sitting there in the picture, that was the vehicle that was inside the structure. All that was consumed was the vehicle. There was no further extension. I think there was like 2 or 3 sprinkler heads going off that was keeping the car in check and letting it take its course. But that car was an EV vehicle that has been sitting there for a year, not charging, and went into runaway. Talking to the engineers of the manufacturers of the vehicle, the only thing that they can kind of come up with was that the chemistry inside the battery, that barrier that I kind of roughly talked about that separates both the cathodes and the anodes, that chemistry started to mix inside the battery packs, which then caused it to go into runaway. But the gases that built up in there. So when you're walking into a building and you have thick, white, dense cloud looking like smoke, that may not be smoke. That may be a gas cloud that's coming out of this based off the batteries you're running into. Just start thinking that in that aspect. Start reading that smoke in that environment before you guys are making entry.
So we'll take a look at the e-scooter battery that we used most often in our studies. 136 cells. You'll notice that it is not UL listed or certified. It has no marks on it to that regard. And just to be clear, the UL performance standards are used by national testing labs or recognized testing labs around the world. So it doesn't have to have the UL stamp on it necessarily, just that it was tested to the UL performance standard. And when we bought 12 of these batteries, we disassembled them and noticed that even though they might have been labeled in the same way, they weren't wired in the same way in terms of the number of batteries in parallel or series. You'll notice that the red wire in the one image is about 2 feet long and doesn't need to be. It's attached to the battery management system. In some of the batteries we disassembled, the wire was a different color. In some cases, it was 4 inches long, differing lengths. So this is giving us an indication that these are kind of handmade as opposed to being made on a production line or being assembled with tight tolerances, assembly tolerances. The battery management system, as we spoke about, is very important to the safe operation of the battery. This battery management system is basically attached to the batteries by double-sided sticky tape. The battery assembly itself is then put inside a steel box. The steel box has a few pieces of 1/4-inch foam tape on the bottom and on the sides and on the lid to try to keep the battery in place. The steel box then is set inside the scooter under a flip-down seat. There's no means in these scooters that we examined for them to tie that battery down. There's no strap, no hook, no clip. The batteries themselves are inherently dangerous. The batteries have a male plug on the top of them that allows it to be plugged into the scooter. That male plug is hot always. There's no switch to turn it off. So it's just a really bad design. Again, the overall size of this is less than a foot on each side. So they're relatively small, but they contain a lot of energy. So here we have one of these scooters, and we have it in the lab, the ULS lab in Northbrook, Illinois. And it's under what we call an oxygen consumption calorimeter, where we can calculate or estimate the heat release rate of the fire based on the amount of oxygen that it consumes. For every kilogram of oxygen consumed, there's generated 13.1 kilojoules of energy. So based on that, you saw how rapidly it went from smoke to fire. Again, this was intentionally overcharged. And we could see that the heat release rate went up to about 1,000 kilowatts or 1 megawatt in just a matter of seconds. You see the heat release rate decreasing, and the reason is that the batteries are no longer contributing as much energy. They're dying out, and we're going from a battery fire basically to a plastics fire as the remains of the scooter get involved. And as more and more of the surface area of those plastics start to burn, and the tires and other combustibles on the scooter, we'll start to see the heat release rate increase again. And we'll give it a few more seconds here on the video, because what you'll notice is that the heat release rate rapidly gets back up to about 1 megawatt again. Keeping in mind that we need about 2 megawatts with adequate ventilation to flash over a residential scale room. Again, this energy source rapidly provides half of that. So then if there's other furniture or other combustibles in that room, you could likely go to flashover very quickly. So again, when we do a research project, we try to look at this, just look at the battery by itself, look at the battery in the scooter, and now we're going to go and look at the scooter in a house, in a structure that we built specially to burn in, and in scenarios that are similar to scenarios that working with FDNY, they saw that were fatal events. So in this case, it was a situation where multiple people were living in an apartment and the person kept their scooter in their bedroom and charged it in their bedroom with the door closed. So we see the smoke, additional smoke as additional cells vent. We see some mixtures of sort of white, gray, black, and then the ignition. So we have an overpressure. The overpressure blew glass out of the window. The hollow core door, even though part of the interior finish was burning away, that held and isolated the bedroom from the rest of the house. So the conditions in the hallway, while not pristine, very low temperature and just a relatively small amount of smoke leaking. However, that pressure, this house had a central heating and air conditioning unit. So that pressure then drove smoke in through that unit. So what we see here is the glass blowing out of the window, 30 feet away from the our test prop. You could see that, and when our firefighters went in, they came back and got a camera to take a picture of the smoke flowing out of the HVAC return vents. So again, if there's an incident, in order to restore that property, all that really needs to be thoroughly cleaned. And again, where do you need to be on air, even though you've got great visibility in the hall or in that living room when you make entry? That smoke and the particulates from that smoke are distributed throughout that building, in part thanks to the HVAC system. So you need to be on air. In these tests, we did post-fire gas collection and particulate collection, so we could start to get an idea of what's in there, especially when you're doing mop-up or for fire investigators, or perhaps even for the home restoration company. We've done some studies where we did it immediately after the fire when it's still a hot zone, 24 hours, 48 hours, and 72 hours later. Even though the gas may dissipate over that time, even if the building is boarded up, there's still particulate there that's a hazard, and your respiratory system needs to be protected. A view of the battery box, the top of it was held on with a few screws. That was blown off, and some of the cells were shot out of the battery box. Here's another scenario, a more common scenario perhaps in some of New York's fatal fires, where the scooter is actually in the living room in front of the entry door, as you can see in the floor plan. We have a camera here at the hallway that is at the far end of the hallway looking down past the bedroom doors toward the living room. What we're trying to get a sense there is how rapidly that means of egress gets cut off after the battery goes into thermal runaway, releases gas, and explodes. So if you had your thermal imager at home and you're checking your scooter while it's charging, you might be able to tell that, hey, there seems to be a problem. We're getting some overheating there in the area of the battery compartment. But for most folks, the first indication that they'll have that there's a problem is the smoke that's starting to discharge from the batteries. We have a little puff there, followed by some additional smoke coming from under the seat. The smoke cloud builds, we get ignition. So again, the overpressure was such that it blew out windows in the living room. It blew out a window from a bedroom that had an open door. It blew that window out toward the end of the hall. We deflected, we didn't have our glass sliders in the house at the time. We had some plywood doors in place, and I'll show you how they were deflected as well. Hinges pulled out. So we could see that very quickly, the means of egress in the hallway, the smoke spanking down. Again, in a ranch house like this, potentially if someone was isolated in their bedroom, they'd be protected for a while. If they felt they needed to get out, they could get out the window. However, if this layout for an apartment was on the 40th floor, they don't have that option. Again, just some ideas of the amount of pressure that's spread throughout the house. some stills from the videos that showed components of the battery, sometimes copper wire, sometimes cells themselves, that were ejected from the battery box and thrown all the way across the room to hit the window. So that's again about 16 feet. Battery distribution, batteries were everywhere. So again, this is an issue of mop up. Some of these batteries that might be ejected might have gone into thermal runaway, some not. Some could be unstable, some could be damaged, but they have stranded energy. There's been at least one reported incident that I'm aware of a fire investigator going in and picking up a loose battery cell off the floor and having it discharge in his hand. So again, gloves, full PPE when you're cleaning up from one of these fires. If you want more information about that series of tests, here's the link to that article. And again, I understand you'll be getting a copy of the PowerPoints and the video, so you can get it from there. So some hazards from the lithium-ion battery packs can include stranded energy for batteries that did not complete thermal runaway, cell and material ejection, rapid heat release rate increase, flame jetting, explosion, acid gas exposure, and exposure to metal particulates. So good news. As you saw on the previous slide by one of the previous slides by Captain Thompson, where basically a EV fire was contained by a sprinkler system. We ran some experiments with sprinkler systems that are intended for residential use that conform to NFPA 13D. And you can see the before and after picture here. The flash and the rapid fire development from the scooter caused enough radiant heat to start to pyrolyze and char the pink bedspread. But then within seconds, the sprinkler was activated and that stopped any further fire development. So the batteries continued to off gas, they continued to burn, but the fire didn't spread. The batteries prevented flashover and limited the damage to the home. Needless to say, if a person was intimate with the fire, they would still potentially have very serious injuries. But if someone was remote from the fire, their chances of injury, needless to say, go down the further they are away. So that was one in a closed bedroom. We did another one where the scooter was in front of the front door, closed front door, and went off. In this particular case, the amount of energy that was released so fast from the scooter triggered 4 sprinkler heads. So one of the things with the NFPA 13D system is they're only designed to flow 2 sprinkler heads. So we were pleasantly surprised to see that even though the sprinkler closest to the scooter had a reduced flow rate of about 9 gallons per minute, it was still enough to wet the furniture and prevent fire spread. So there were components of the battery that we found on the sofas and on the carpet where it had started to burn into the cushion or burn into the carpet, but then the sprinkler came on and wet those fuels and prevented them from participating further in the fire. So again, prevented flashover and reduced the hazard that's in that structure. This study was recently published a few months ago, and again, you have full access to that.
Bringing it back to reality then. We had a similar incident, just like Dan was just talking about. The lithium-ion batteries inside the apartments being held in check by sprinkler heads. We had a 14-story residential high-rise building that companies responded to as a structure fire. Upon arrival, they had nothing showing from the outside. When they made entry into the lobby area, to the fire control room, they found the alarm panel that showed they had activation of smoke detectors, activation that they had a sprinkler running, and activation that the fire pumps were working inside the building. Which for us, that means what? Pretty good chance you got a working fire inside one unit. It was all reported on the 7th floor. As companies ascended up the stairwell was clear. As they get up to that stairwell, they have light, hazy smoke inside the hallway. Members then made the right call and decided to suit up in that hallway inside the staircase and go on air. As they progressed down the hallway for further investigation, it's about 30, 40 feet. They make a left. They see the fire unit. The one member does. goes ahead, makes entry to see what they're working with, see if they can identify if there's anybody in the room real quickly. While he's in there, he notices that they have an e-scooter in the corner of the room that's in thermal runaway being held checked by the sprinkler. Plenty good. And nobody was inside the unit. It was small. It's a hotel that was converted into a homeless occupancy now. So there were only like 400 square feet. So he did a quick search. Came back out to instruct the captain who was in the hallway to tell him what he had, that he had an e-scooter that was being held in check. They were having some communication issues. The captain really couldn't understand the member through the face piece. So the member decided to remove the face piece for a second, tell the captain what they're working with. Knowing the hazards with lithium-ion battery, the member went back on air and then went ahead and went in to start mitigating the fire. Fire got knocked down, just like this one. It was in the corner and maybe 8 feet away, just like Jan showed in the videos. All this stuff we're talking about, the heat release rate, the thermal temperatures that are being brought into these rooms, it activated the one sprinkler head. Looking at that picture, I would never anticipate a sprinkler head being activated unless it was directly over that burn scar there. But it was about 6 feet away, and that sidewall got activated and started working. So the thermal event was taken away, but we still have that gas component and that particulate component inside that unit that we need to deal with. So the hazmat teams did get responded. They did up there. They did their meter readings by the teams that got up there. The batteries were already starting to work to get out of there. 40 minutes go by. Everybody remained on air. The incident commander did a great job when, as soon as he knew that it was a lithium-ion battery incident, told everybody that's operating on that fire floor, everybody has to be on air if they're working around that battery. So 40 minutes go by. This member's proceeding outside of the structure to start kind of taking a little rest period, starts to feel ill, starts to feel a little sick, a little nauseous, little flu-like symptoms. The paramedics on scene see him and go, "Hey, you don't look so good." "Yeah, I'm not feeling too good." "All right, let me go get my equipment and check you out." The member sits down, now starts to have shortness of breath. And as the paramedics are starting to assess him, his respiratory drive is getting worse. It's getting shorter and faster, shorter and faster. He can't feel like he catches breath. So they grab him, throw him on the gurney, get him going to the hospital. En route, same thing. He could not slow down his respiratory drive. They tried to put him on a CPAP. We're trying to nebulize albuterol to him, anything to try to kind of calm down his respiratory spasming that was taking place. He got to the hospital, same thing. Medical teams there, they were trying to reduce his respiratory drive, trying to get him to calm down. They couldn't. They had to intubate him. He was in the ICU for 2 days. And then they were finally able to extubate him after his respiratory kind of slowed down. And then he was in the hospital for 2 more days. And he hasn't been back to duty since. And that's been since May. 2 weeks after that incident, FD&Y had a similar incident with an e-scooter on a porch of a single family dwelling. 40 minutes later, member began having severe respiratory distress, had to get intubated and was in an ICU. So I can't stress enough that even though the fire's out, and maybe even the smoke is kind of dissipated, but we're still having to manage those gases and those particulates that are inside the environment. And we need to figure out how we're going to mitigate those. Talking about EVs. So we kind of highlighted some of the hazards and some of the stuff that you guys can see out there regarding e-mobility devices and lithium-ion batteries in general. But let's talk about electric vehicles for a second. How much water is needed to extinguish an electric vehicle fire? This here stated a fire company flowed 600 gallons a minute for 42 minutes, which came out to about 25,000 gallons just to extinguish the auto fire. Another example here, 40,000 gallons to extinguish a car fire. Who's got a 40,000 gallon fire engine? I don't either. So what does that look like for us when we're trying to navigate through this? What are our firefighting tactics and techniques can we use to extinguish these fires? Case in point here, we had a car carrier here that had a car full of electric vehicles, 7 of them to be exact, on a car carrier on the major interstate freeway, the Highway 5. Which, if you don't know from this area, if you're not from California, is a major thoroughfare for commercial trucks to go up and down the state to get commercial going. These fires and this auto fires basically actually started with a normal internal combustion vehicle. The truck that was carrying the trailer caught on fire, which unfortunately then exposed the EVs, which then now the EVs were a problem for us because we're talking about firefighting tactics and how much water. If I wanted 40,000 gallons, that's going to take me probably about at least 10 to 12 engine companies coming on scene and constantly doing a water shuttle, because where's your freeway on-ramps and off-ramps for this rural location? How many water tenders can you really bring in to fill up the engine that's going to, if you are going to extinguish this? So do you let these things burn, but then you're shutting down major thoroughways? Do you try to extinguish it? How do you combat that? Just for case study wise, for us, we were fortunate. About another 400 feet down the road from this incident, there was an overpass. And I think it's got to be one of the only overpasses in the city of Los Angeles that actually has a hydrant on the overpass, which then we did what we call an improvised standpipe here. We used the aerial, we threw it up to the overpass, connected to the hydrant, ran the hose down, and then ran another 400 feet back to the engine. That was kind of just keeping the fire in check and making sure there was no further extension. But then you also have the other problem. What do you do with these vehicles when it's all said and done? How do you render them safe? Where does that go? Who's your, what we call secondary responders that are going to come in and remove these vehicles? And what does that look like? And how much of a process is that going to take? So let's talk about some firefighting techniques and what we're dealing with. Once again, going back to the chemistry. How do you know what you're working with? Well, every auto manufacturer is using different styles of battery makeups. You look at the GM there, that GM there, that's the pouches that I talked about earlier. And they're just all individually stacked pouches in there. You have the Tesla, which is the most common one, which you have the cylindrical cells, the 18650, and there's thousands of those inside the vehicle there. Or you have Audi that's using those prismatics that are going to be an issue and a challenge for us. And this technology is continuing to change. That one automaker that I showed you that picture that had the runaway, they used the 18650s originally. Now they want to put one big giant pouch in the bottom of that vehicle as the power source. And what does that, when that frame gets crunched, what does that look like for us? What does it look like to the occupant that's trapped inside that vehicle if we're going to be doing extrication on them? So here, Dan's going to talk about some studies of what they did and some firefighting techniques that they learned.
So this was the first EV that we burned, and we did it in collaboration with the Boston Fire Department and Worcester Polytechnic Institute, which is a university up in Massachusetts that has a fire protection engineering program. So we burned a Hyundai Kona, full EV. And one of the reasons that you'll see that we burned a number of these Konas is because they sell them around the world as full EVs, as plug-in hybrids, and also as a internal combustion engine vehicle. And it's effectively the same vehicle. So we wanted to do some comparisons with internal combustion engine vehicle fires, because again, we hadn't really been too concerned about the heat release rate of those or the gas toxicity of those. So we want to use those as somewhat of a baseline to compare the EVs to. What you see in the one image there is with the rear seat removed, there's the emergency shutoff switch, that orange switch. It's made out of plastic. So needless to say, when that battery pack gets hot, that'll melt and provide access into that battery module. The battery modules under the rear seat are double stacked, as you'll see in this image. So where the double stacked modules are, and you can see the orange switch there on top, that's under the rear passenger seat, and the rest is under the floorboard. The battery modules are all stacked on a heavy aluminum plate. The aluminum plate goes the full width of the car and is bolted to the frame rails on the sides. It begins at the rear of the front wheel well, and it ends just in front of the rear wheel well. So basically, between the wheel wells and wall to wall is a battery pack. You'll see that there are some electrical connections there, as well as some what appear to be fluid connections or plumbing connections on the front of that battery pack. And again, we spoke earlier about the batteries, trying to keep them in an optimal temperature range, both for charging and for use, and to keep them safe. So there's a coolant system there that has heaters and chillers plates. to, depending on the temperature outside or the environmental conditions, trying to keep those batteries in that optimal temperature range. So we got the battery fully involved. It took over 30 minutes to get the fire to what we felt was heavy battery engagement and the fire kind of at its peak. And then we asked the fire department to use the reach of the stream, stay upwind, and try to start with the 45-degree angle because the potential for things to shoot off or shoot out of the car, and see what they could do. They're flowing about 170 gallons a minute here. You can see on the thermal imager that where the water's hitting the body of the car, the doors and the sides, that's cooled off on the driver's side. And it's still pretty warm on the passenger side, just basically because no water's gotten to that point yet. We let them flow for 2 minutes and then we asked them to shut down. So basically we went from a car that looked like the one in the upper left there and got it down to a light smoke that was coming out of it. So 2 minutes of fire attack, 350 gallons of water. We found in subsequent testing that we can get that down potentially to 80 gallons of water or 80 to 200 gallons of water, basically to take the cabin fire away. A lot of what's burning there and giving off a lot of energy and black smoke are the foam plastics that are in the car, in the dashboard, in the upholstery, and the seats and the cushions. So your hose stream can knock that out and take that away pretty quickly. And then let's take a tactical pause and see what kind of fire we have left. And so shutting down the line, letting it sit for a few minutes. Now we see, okay, we do have a battery fire. Likely when you run up to this car on a highway, if it's fully engulfed in flames, you're not going to be able to tell if it's an EV or not. So again, the same approach is appropriate. Hit it with water, knock it down, make sure you don't have any life safety concerns, and then start looking at exposures and other things to mitigate the incident. So what you see here is the battery fire. So you see that the heat release rate from the battery fire alone is significantly lower than the whole vehicle involved with all the plastics burning. The color of the smoke is different, different combustion products coming off. But now this is the fire that's a challenge because the battery's installed under the car. The battery compartments and cases are built to keep dirt out, keep water out normally. Some of the battery cases have covers that will burn away, then to provide you with some access to getting water on the battery, typically via openings in the wheel wells or under the car through the wheel wells. So here's a sequence of photos to kind of show you to help you determine, yes, I've got a battery fire. So you've got fire coming from under the car. You'll notice that in the three images, the two in the middle and the one below, without any intervention, you see that the size of the flame is changing. That's because as additional, in this case, this car has pouch cells. As additional pouches fail and vent their gas, the flames can flare up. And then when that process slows down, the flames go down. So there's some good news to having it burn off. It means we're not accumulating hydrogen anywhere and it's just burning off. So that's taking away a risk of, if this was in a garage or in a confined space, it's taking away that explosion risk. I should say reducing it. So then we had them fight the fire some more. We tried a number of different practices that we'd heard about, such as trying to bounce the water off the ground up into the plate, that aluminum plate to cool it. That was not effective. The best impact was being able to get water in the wheel wells, or toward the end, putting water in the passenger compartment to try to get a layer of water on the floor of the vehicle, which is above the batteries. And if there's openings in the vehicle, like there was in this case, that would allow us to put water into the battery area itself through that hole behind the rear seat or the rear passenger seat, we did that. We also used an undercar nozzle here. The undercar nozzle quickly took the flames away from the area where it was positioned. One of the challenges with the undercar nozzles is the cars are so low and the tire with flattened tires or whatnot, you may need to have jack the car up to get the nozzle underneath. And then because the nozzle, even if it has a pretty wide spray range, it's so close to the car, its effective area on that battery plate is very small. So we found those not to be much different than just using the straight water stream in terms of cooling. So we kind of see the situation that we were able to get the car to. And then there was still some smoke coming out of that port under the back seat, as you'll see in the image on the upper right. Basically, the firefighters flowed water into that port for a minute or so, and then all the smoke production from the vehicle stopped. So our takeaways, the single hand line, 150 to 170 gallons a minute, had an impact on controlling the fire. Use the reach of the stream because there's a lot of smoke as a hazard. Airbags, hydraulic struts, batteries. I was truly impressed that we had flames out of the windows, flames out of the sunroof, and even with those flames going for several minutes, then we were having airbags continue to go off and explode. So you don't want to have a firefighter's face or a firefighter close to the vehicle at that point in time. Knock down, control the bulk of the fire, and then reassess. Shut the line down and see what you have. Do you have a battery fire? Is the battery involved? There's been incidents where EVs have been on fire, but the fire started in the passenger compartment. Fire department came, knocked that cabin fire down, and the batteries did not even get involved. It takes a fair amount of heat to get the batteries involved. Narrow fog can be used to control flames from the battery to enable access. There's some incidents, one in Boston and plans in New York. If they have EV fires in the tunnel, the approach is to quickly knock the bulk of the fire down and hook chains to the car and drag it out of the tunnel and deal with the remaining fire outside the tunnel. Apply additional water as needed, again, depending on your situation with regard to exposures and things of that nature. We learned that some things didn't work. Trying to bounce the water off the ground really didn't work. The water hit the ground and just kind of shot across the ground. Is that good if you're trying to protect the road surface or something like that? Sure, but it's not going to cool the battery pack. Excess water doesn't really help. There's only a limited amount of water that can contact that metal surface. So if you increase your flow rate out of your hose stream, you're just bouncing more water off and doesn't have contact time with the hot surface. So it's not improving the cooling rate. We wanted to look at things such as raising, maybe cutting. And so we have that in our list of things to look at. And I'll show you some of that in the next couple of slides. Piercing the battery modules. We have concerns about that because you don't understand how much stranded energy there may be in the battery module. And certainly one way to get the module to go in a thermal runaway would be to pierce it with a piece of metal. So we're concerned about that. Also, we're not sure about the effectiveness. The battery modules are typically packed pretty tightly. So will a piercing nozzle really be able to spread water and cool in that environment? So we think there's certainly a lot more testing research that needs to be done with regard to that strategy. You'll see here in some of the images when we tilted the car on its side, some of the holes or access points in front of and behind the plate that if you can get water in there, you can actually get water on the battery to impact cooling. So that was a value. Did we put the fire out? Maybe, maybe not. Basically, what we do after we test the cars is we have appropriately trained electrical people take the cars apart to see if we have any battery left. In this case, we didn't have any battery left. So did we put it out or did the battery put itself out and we just happened to be flowing water at the time? The good news there is that if you let it burn and these batteries are burning and fully engaged, they don't burn all that long. And I'll show you some ranges of that. So we get into evidence-based EV firefighting. This is work that Adam Barry, Nate Sauer, and many others on our team are running, where we're now taking this research into the lab. And so we started with Boston. That helped provide us with some guidance on what we wanted to measure, how we wanted to measure it, and conduct the tests in the lab. A lot of the questions that we get from the fire service and from the tech panel are EV fires, do they grow faster than regular internal combustion engine cars? Are the fires bigger? Do they have a higher heat release rate? Do they burn longer? What's the fire spread exposure risk? What are the occupational and public exposure hazards? How effective are typical firefighting tools? Basically, your hose line. And what are the hazards of explosions and projectiles during an EV fire? So the first question is, what cars do we burn? So we looked at the sales data for cars across the United States to try to get a sense of what car are you most likely to encounter. So we had some Teslas, a model of Chevy, the Ford Mach-E, a couple of Hyundais to look at. So that's how we made those choices. Further, we bought these cars. While we have auto manufacturers on our tech panel, we want to make sure that we're getting something that's representative of the market and something that you'd likely see on the street. So again, we're trying to take away any bias. So the experimental setup in the lab, we did 9 free burns, and then we did an additional 9 experiments so far, where we're looking at different forms of suppression, hose stream, the use of a fire blanket, the use of an agent, F500 in this case, and also a blanket with an under vehicle nozzle. So for the free burns, the way we have the cars set up is they're mounted on a tray, and that tray is used to collect water, so we can see what kind of contaminants are in the runoff from the suppression water. We also have it between some metal walls that are measuring heat flux, so we get an idea of how much energy would be transferred to a car parked next to it, or a house that the car is parked next to see if it would ignite that or not. In addition to the tray that you see highlighted in red, we had it mounted on 4 load cells. That load cell gives us a mass loss rate, so then we can calculate the heat release rate of the vehicles. There you see the test setup a little bit more. We also are measuring for exposures. So we have 2 test positions basically at firefighter height on the floor. One 10 feet 10 feet away from the vehicle, one 15 feet away from the vehicle. We also have an exposure, a series of sensors in the plume to measure the worst case exposure, if you will. We've instrumented the battery packs and parts of the car to look at temperature. This is a look at the setup again in the lab in Northbrook, Illinois. So where you see the fabric hanging from the ceiling, that's basically where we're capturing smoke in the plume and where our sensors are for sort of the worst case scenario. We also did suppression tests. Then that was sort of phase 2 in that with that setup. So what did we find in terms of characterizing these fires and comparing them to internal combustion engine vehicle fires? The peak heat release rate between the internal combustion engine vehicle fires, we had those with 13.2 gallons of gas in the tank. We started the EVs on fire by putting a gas burner under a battery module, letting it drive a portion of the batteries into thermal runaway, and then watching the fire spread and grow. With the internal combustion engine car, we had the gas burner near the firewall under the engine compartment, typically where you might get an engine fire starting. And of course, that failed a gas line then, and then we had a pool fire from the gas line. So basically, we had the fires were similar and in a range between 6 and 12 megawatts. 12 megawatts. So if you remember, our sofa had a peak heat release rate of 5 megawatts. So basically on the highway, you've got 2 to 3 sofas on the side of the highway burning when this is at its peak. If they were sofas, one sweep of your hose line would put that out, no problem. because the fuel load in the case of the EVs and in many cases with the internal combustion engine vehicle as well, could be shielded by the hood or other components of the car. You may have to work at it to get water where you need it, if that's required. The burning duration for both vehicles, just letting them burn out with no intervention, is similar, 40 to 70 minutes. So the good news for the batteries is once the batteries are really going, we're seeing typically they burn on average, again, depending on how big the battery is, and to some degree, the type of construction of the battery, between 30 and 60 minutes. So again, this concept of perhaps just letting it burn. If you're interested in time, how fast can we move to clear this? That's sort of a baseline for your consideration of what your other options might be. And the fire growth rate actually showed that the EV fire growth rate was actually a little bit slower, similar, but slower than the internal combustion engine vehicles. And in part because the batteries are confined, contained, and that thermal propagation process takes some time to keep it moving. Whereas once we kind of have a fuel spill, the fire picks up pretty quickly. So what about the fire risk spread to exposures? So in this case, we see that we've got these panels, the steel panels on either side, and we have thermal imaging cameras behind them. And so we're basically using some color-coded animation to give you a sense of how much energy is being transferred to the panels on either side of the car as the fire develops. So in this particular case, the bulk of the fire is coming from the rear of the vehicle, out of the rear wheel wells. And so we could see that the panels toward the rear of the vehicle are going from a dark blue to a lighter blue. They're heating up, starting to go into a green, indicating that the heat flux, the energy release rate, is getting up to 15 kilowatts per meter squared or so. So that energy is picking up. And so then we look at some standards from NFPA with regard to ignition criteria for building exteriors to give us an idea of how far away this vehicle would have to be from a building facade if the maximum heat flux that the building facade can take is 12.5 kilowatts per meter squared. And so we have the car there as our source term. And we look and based on the energy from the panels, we could see that we need to be about 16 feet away if we're going to protect that. Just due to distance. There's also been some instances from the field where jet lengths were reported up to 8 feet away, jets coming out of the side of the battery case. We did not witness that in our testing, but we just included it here to be thorough and try to understand what kind of spacing we might need. So needless to say, the bigger the vehicle, the bigger the battery. We have some large vehicles out in the parking lot for you to look at, which have bigger batteries. They may need a further distance if more of the batteries get involved sooner. Again, we didn't see any jets. However, there's been some anecdotal evidence of strong jets, which could increase the risk of fire spread if there's flame contact with the target. Need to consider other exposure vulnerabilities. Are you in a parking garage? Are you worried about spalling concrete, damage to infrastructure, things of that nature on your bridge? There are cases for some of the cars that we tested where they have part of the battery case is either a composite that's combustible that may help you get access to the batteries. In other cases, some of the aluminum, after we just let the car burn unattended, the aluminum tray started to drop out and separate from the car. So if you pulled the car back, you'd basically have the tray laying there with batteries to give access. In the cases where there was a steel battery case, that always, in our tests anyway, that always stayed attached to the vehicle. So now we get into smoke, firefighter exposure, water. So we had the stations where we're measuring smoke at 10 feet, as I indicated before, 15 feet away from the vehicle and above the vehicle in the plume. We did active sampling with air pumps where we're looking for things like BTEX, so benzene, toluene, ethylene, xylene, styrene. We're looking for metals, PAHs, acid gases such as HF, HCl, HCN, SO2. We did some passive sampling where we have silicone wristbands looking for PFAS, looking for dioxins, furans, also PAHs, some turnout composite swatches. As the captain indicated earlier, some of these things are hard to measure in gas form because they settle out or they attach to a particulate. So we're doing swab samples of surfaces as well. Firefighter exposure during suppression. We had air sampling pumps on our firefighters. And also turnout composite swatches of gear on their arms, their chest, and their leg. So what we do with those swatches is we determine what the level of contamination is on them and what they're contaminated with. And then having that baseline data, then we take those swatches and we send them off to be professionally cleaned using different methods. So basically just sort of a water and scrub brush type thing running through the extractor and also CO2 cleaning. And so I don't have those results for you yet. That washing is ongoing now. These tests were run in May. So we're getting ready to finalize that. And then we'll retest those swatches again to see how much of the contaminant was removed. Water runoff analysis. Again, no surprise, we're seeing if there were whatever metal is in that battery chemistry, we're seeing that in the water runoff. So we had high levels of nickel, cobalt, manganese, lithium. They were all higher in the EV fires than in the internal combustion engine fires. There were a couple metals where in the internal combustion engine fires, such as lead, where there was more lead in the smoke from the internal combustion engine fire than there was from the EV fires. We're seeing that consistent between what's in the air and also what's being deposited on the PPE samples. Acid gases are similar across vehicle types. The fluoride particulate is elevated in the EV fires. PFAS compounds were present in fires from both vehicle types. PAHs and inhalable particulates were similar. Slightly higher median values actually in the internal combustion engine vehicles. Specific to PPE exposure, metal contamination of the PPE was an order of magnitude higher in the plume than at the floor level, so not surprising. Typically, you would not be in the plume with the exception of a change in wind. So you might consider yourself upwind, all of a sudden the wind changes and engulfs you in that the plume coming off the fire. So that's sort of the worst case exposure. Battery metals went through the outer shell and reached the moisture barrier and thermal liner for the samples that were installed at basically 5 feet or so above the floor. PAH concentrations on the PPE from fires in both vehicle types were similar to exposures during both outside vent operations during structural firefighting. So again, this level of contamination or exposure is not necessarily new. As you might be well aware, when you respond to a structure fire, that in some cases could be considered a hazmat event as well, given all the plastics and batteries and other things that are in a structure fire. So just keep that in mind as well. Lower molecular weight PAHs were found in the inner layers of the turnout ensembles more so than the heavier PAHs. So are there hazards and of explosions and projectiles during an EV fire? Shrapnel hazard. We found some battery components within a few feet of the car in terms of ejection from the batteries. But there are other projectile risks, both in the internal combustion engine cars and the EV cars, in terms of tire repair kits that are included in the cars with a pressure vessel, gas struts, tires, shocks, components of the air conditioning system, airbag inflators, seatbelt pretensioners, magnesium parts. All these things can shoot out when you're making a fire attack. So I really emphasize, to the extent you can, use the reach of the stream so you have that cool down and that fire knocked down. Another concern that wasn't addressed here, but we're starting to address, are the explosion hazards due to the buildup of battery gas. So that's an important consideration. So you see some of the material that was ejected from the car. So the car's been was burning like that for several minutes. And then we have material popping and shooting out. So now we switch gears. We've talked about the hazards. We've talked about characterizing what lithium ion batteries are and how they can present themselves in a fire environment. And now the question is, how effective can we be? What can we do about it? So with that, we'll start on operational considerations.
It's through the pre-fire planning. Here on the LFD, we call that like a windshield survey. Start finding out what is in your district. Do you have a ton of e-mobility devices parked? Do you have a ton of storefronts that are selling these things, manufacturing them, commercials, battery recycling centers? Do you have other heavy equipment, like I mentioned, in the rental yards coming in as electric devices? Are your cities going to a clean initiative, zero emission initiatives in all their vehicles? The school buses, the garbage trucks, you name it, it's going to EV, and you need to start identifying how big of a hazard do you have when it comes to developing your plan of attack. Looking at your BESS systems, your battery energy storage systems. Are those coming into your cities? Where are those located? What businesses are having those? Is it just getting its power from solar? Or is it using hydrogen and CNG on scene that are going through fuel cells and then creating that energy and being stored in lithium ion battery packs? Because that'll also change your tactics and your strategies when you're dealing with these. Are you having a significant amount of this product being transferred through your station? I'm sorry, through your districts, via rail, via semi-truck? All that, start developing how much of a hazard or a problem you have in your city, your jurisdiction, and what are you gonna have to do to kind of combat that? And what are the makeups of those battery systems? What is the chemistry? Like I talked about, is it using an alternative fuel source to create the energy to be stored into lithium ion batteries? Where are your charging stations at? Are they at street level? Are they getting put into parking structures? Above ground of the parking structures, below ground of the parking structures? Are they getting put in carports underneath apartment complexes? Are they getting put into, here at the airport, there's a whole terminal that's over an entire charging station for electric tugs. What does that look like for you? Where do you come to in identifying signs? Is your agency or your city good about identifying using the DOT placarding? We found here that sometimes they're just slapping the hazard 9 on the products when they're shipping them or they're transporting them through. Or are they using the 3840, 3841, the actual UN label numbers to identify that there's actual lithium ion batteries inside there? And how many of those trucks do you see coming through? Or is there an E sign or a EV sticker on the transportation vehicles? Paying attention to that. And then looking into what new fire code is coming out. International Fire Code 2026 has got a slew of changes that comes to deal with lithium ion batteries. How they're stored, where they're stored, how much energy is allowed to be in them, what type of sprinkler systems to be involved. That's going to impact your fire prevention unit or your fire inspectors if you have them. Building codes, what does that look like? Initially, I don't know if you guys remember, but a lot of energy storage systems that were put on single-family dwellings were initially being put inside garages. Now you'll find them only on the outside of the garages. Why? Because of the hazards associated with it. Same thing with large energy storage systems. I don't know if San Diego Fire and Rescue's here, but they've had a couple large-scale incidents where they had these energy storage systems in large A-frame corrugated metal buildings, which caused significant hazards and issues when it came to mitigating those, which then changed now. They're no longer allowed to be inside buildings. They have to be out in open air. They have to be out in an open area. So these are all these things that you guys got to kind of start looking at now and helping you develop your tactics and your strategies when you're responding to these emergencies and truly acknowledging what is the problem you have. So now you have your education, you identified your target hazards in your district. Now you need to develop an SOP or an SOG for your fire department. And what should be considered in that? Probably some of the recommendations that we came up with is the scope. Each type of battery has its own challenges and hazards. What's going to be the policy? What's going to be responding to there? What's going to be the tactics and a flow path? Who's going to be responsible for what on scene based on the policy of what you're deciding what's going to be dispatched to these incidents? What procedures are going to take place? What is the PPE? What is the equipment going to be used? How they're going to take that approach? And then we'll put some references up there as well for you guys to take down to help you navigate this new world of identifying these SOPs and SOGs. So scope, what are you mitigating? Like I said, each one of these, EV, e-mobility, BESS, transportation, they're all going to come with their own unique challenges and their own unique hazards. So I recommend not writing one policy just for lithium-ion batteries in general. You're going to have to break it down because they all play a different factor when you're talking about this technology. When you're writing your policy, this is the question that we get a lot. Should every lithium-ion battery be a hazardous materials incident? The fire? No. The fire component, the thermal component, that is a typical fire response, right? But then the rest of it doesn't require a hazardous materials response. And across the nation, right now, everybody's doing the similar response. If they identify that's a lithium-ion battery, they're requesting a hazmat resource and tagging the hazmat resources. And that's because of some of the issues that we've already discussed here today. The term DDR, I don't know if you ever heard that term. It's a common term used in the battery world. It means damaged, defective, or recalled batteries. When it has one of those three categories, it'll have the hazards that we've been talking about all day today: thermal runaway, gas release, possible electrocution, environmental contamination, right? Explosion hazards. So when you're looking at the hazards that are associated with these batteries, then you start looking at these regulatory agencies that are determining how we operate sometimes. You start looking at those definitions, it starts to clear up whether you need to have a hazardous materials response to it or not. So just to kind of go over some of them, Cal OSHA and OSHA state their definition of a hazardous substance is very broad, but it says any material that poses an acute or chronic health risk through fire, explosion, or toxic release, such as lithium battery runaway, where the release of toxic gases and flammable vapors, are all recognized hazardous substances. Therefore, underneath HAZWOPER, if responders may be exposed to these materials, the incident qualifies as a hazmat event requiring the appropriate PPE training and procedures. And then Cal OSHA, obviously here in the state of California, reiterates the same thing and enforces it even stricter here underneath the criteria underneath hazmat technicians and specialists. The EPA and the Department of Toxic Substance, through their characterization of hazardous waste materials, is that if it's burned or a damaged lithium-ion cells qualify as a hazardous waste because they exhibit reactivity, ignitability, and toxicity. Storage, transport, or damage of post-incident debris must follow hazardous waste generator rules. The Department of Toxic Substance classifies lithium-ion debris and electrolyte residues and contaminated absorbents as universal or hazardous materials waste. Per the NFPA regulations, when you're looking at these, and it's some of the reference that we'll put up when we're talking about writing your policies, NFPA 470 defines battery energy storage systems and electric vehicle batteries as materials presenting chemical, electrical, and thermal hazards requiring a hazmat response operations level at minimum. NFPA 855, it directly references hazmat level planning for fires and failures involving ESSs. And in the fire scope, the hazmat work group here in the state of California, currently through their paperwork and papers, they advise that all lithium-ion battery events are hazmat events due to the toxic off-gassing and the reignition risks. And lastly, Department of Transportation and PHMSA, underneath their definitions regarding lithium-ion batteries, if a vehicle collision or shipping container incident results in release, venting, or fire, it meets DOT's definition of a hazardous materials release in transportation, which then requires reporting and specialized cleanup requirements applied. So as you can see, there's no set that has to be a lithium or has to be a hazardous materials technician or specialist response. The only one that got very in-depth with the type of response was the Cal OSHA, where it said it had to be a minimum of FRO level, right? But that was the EPA, where Cal OSHA said that not only is it a hazardous materials response, but then the people have to have the proper training, proper procedures, and equipment to mitigate those. So who has that equipment on your fire departments? Are you going to supply HF meters and all the other different gas meters to every single fire company and train them on that? Is that possible? Like Dan showed some of the firefighting equipment that has came out, it's very expensive. If it is effective at all, if you can't afford it, can you afford it for 20, 30, 40, 60 fire companies to all have it? And where are you going to put that on the apparatus that we already are stuffed full? We're being asked to be a jack of many trades and a master of none. And it's getting more challenging as more and more equipment comes out. But what does that look like for us? And then the training component. I don't know about you, but it's very challenging here in the LAFD to train over 3,700 firefighters and get them to do the same exact thing every single time and keep up on that as well. Or do you look at minimizing that in the sense of buying minimal equipment, supply the more technical training to a smaller group of individuals, such as a hazmat group, that can do it correctly because they have that hazmat training. They understand gas, they understand chemistry, they understand how to redeem that environment safe. And what does that look like safe? Who knows here how to go look up IDLHs and identify what type of environment are you in and whether it's safe to come off a breather or not? Not too many people do, except for the trained hazmat teams do. And so that's why right now it has fell back to being at the technician level, at least here in the LAFD and a lot of surrounding agencies where hazmat teams respond to this to render the battery safe. They understand the chemistry, they understand the work environments, and to look that stuff up, and then they have the proper meterings to look at that. So when you're looking at responsibilities and delineating those, what is going to be the IC's job on these incidents? Obviously, their main job is going to develop the objectives of what they're going to, how they're going to combat that. What's our posture on this? Are your zones established? Is safety in place? Do I need additional resources coming? What subject matter experts do you guys have available to you to respond to that incident depending on what you're dealing with and how you're going to navigate that? Safety officers, what should they be looking for on scene? As we're here today, because we're all learning about lithium-ion batteries and really the problems that we're having to navigate through, but do all our safety officers have that information? So writing in there, what should they be looking for on scene? PPEs, what is the appropriate safety distances? Is the public being protected through evacuations or sheltering in place? What is the decon policy for our firefighters afterwards? What kind of exposure reports are getting done? How are we going to decon the equipment? All that stuff. A hazmat group supervisor, maybe incorporating that into your policy when they get there to help guide the incident, take that load off the incident commanders. And the company officers, these are the ones that are going to be first on scene of these incidents. What actions should they be taking? What does their 360s look like? What is their thresholds to then escalate these incidents? And what protection measures should they put in place? So the procedures for the company officers and everybody else, when you're looking at procedures, is your size up, your typical size up that you have now with your department, is it adequate enough or do we need to add more to it? What are the appropriate PPEs? What are you going to mandate to be the PPEs? Obviously, the recommendation should be full encapsulated turnouts, structure firefighting turnouts in an SCBA when you're working that environment until you could deem it safe through gas metering and air monitoring. But that's up to you as your agency. When can you come off air? When is that environment now safe to kind of de-escalate the incident, let your guard down and start operating off air? Or when can you repopulate the residents back into their home or that environment or lift that evacuation order? All that stuff. Air monitoring, what are the thresholds? What is your standard going to be like we were talking about? Overhaul and reignition prevention. Who's going to now deal with those batteries and what does that look like? Let's say you're taking it out of high rise. How do you get that out of there? Who's going to be in charge of doing the sweep of the unit to make sure you don't have those individual cells, those battery packs? I don't know if you guys have dealt with them, but they go everywhere when that battery pack comes apart. And those each one that didn't have an event, they're very capable of having their own individual event in that unit when you're doing overhaul if you didn't sweep them all up. And if we already cleared the area of air monitoring saying, hey, everything's good ranges, we're all good to operate in here, we're off air now, we're doing our normal routine of cleanup, but then these batteries start going off. And before you know it, it doesn't take long to build up explosive gases in the environment, start building up asphyxiant gases, and now your firefighter's in a bad spot. So what does that look like when you're rewriting these to avoid the reignition? And what type of PPEs are they going to have when they're removing the batteries? Are they going to be full SCBA, on-turnouts, gloves on? Are you using tools or buckets to move it? And who's the second responders that are going to come and help you guys with that? Some fire departments, they're taking that whole lift on them and storing these batteries and doing the submersion and all that stuff. Here, we're very fortunate. We have LA County Health Hazmat as a second responder that comes out to help us deal with these batteries. We're moving them off site until they're rendered safe. But these are the things that you got to kind of consider when you're looking at this, because these batteries, you can't just throw in an overhaul pile. These things could go into runaway 2 days, 3 days, 30 days. There is no rhyme or reason to it. There is no set standard like, well, it's at a 30% charge and it's this type of battery, so it's safe in 24 hours. It doesn't exist. So you got to come up with that threshold of how long you're going to monitor maybe a vehicle on scene before you render it safe, that it's completely out if you didn't let it fully consume itself. Or batteries in a bucket that you're submerging, how long are you going to leave it there? Are you going to leave it with the property owner? Are you going to haul it off and store it at a fire station? What does that look like? How long is it going to be sitting in that stuff? And then your decon policy, and we'll get into some decon here a little bit later and exposure control, but what is your decon policy? How are you safely ensuring that all these particulates and metals and absorbent gases that we're talking about that's getting into our turnouts and our breathers, how are we going to render those safe moving forward? And what does that look like prior to us leaving the scene? And here's some of the reference I was talking about, 470 to 855. If you're looking for material to kind of help guide you when you're writing your policy or your procedure, I encourage you to look these up and take a look at them. Annual training. What type of annual training do we recommend moving forward? The battery chemistry is constantly changing right now. So I encourage you guys annually to look that up. Put somebody in charge of that. Get a subject matter expert in your agency that's staying on top of these things. Right now, like I talked about the chemistry earlier on, it's called a liquid electrolyte that's flowing through these batteries. Well, the newer technology that they're looking at, because of the thermal runaway component, they're looking at it's called a solid state electrolyte. And what does that look like for the fire service? Right when we think we're starting to get our hands around these challenges, now they're going to change the chemistry on us, and we have no clue what that looks like in our world. Right? So staying on top of those and recognizing all the past events, understanding how to identify an EV or BESS systems moving forward, staying on top of the different gases as the constant studies come out. Someone asked me about some other things, and I told them at the end of the day, the real problem is even though we're giving you guys a slew of information today, and RFSI has done a tremendous job of diving into this stuff, I feel like we're barely touching the surface of how much information we need for this stuff. There's still so much to learn about this. So I encourage annual training of kind of refreshing that and keeping up on the gases and the stuff that's coming out. Extrication techniques. That's going to be changing as well. The batteries move all over the place in these things. We had one car that they thought they did the extrication. They thought they accounted for all the batteries. The next morning, they're going back to the junkyard because it's on fire because the battery in a glove box that we had no clue of went off into runaway. So staying up on those techniques. Developing tactical decision-making for your company officers. Putting them through some challenges and making sure that they're operating safely and following your SOPs and SOGs. And then lastly, training on decon. How to properly don and doff our safety equipment, limit the amount of exposure moving forward. So your response framework, talking about EVs, and when you're looking at how to develop your framework, I encourage you to look at some of these references. Pay attention to past incidents that are going across the nation. Talk to other fire agencies. What are those SOPs and SOGs looking like? And how are they combating these moving forward? And what do you do with all that information? So when you're looking at, particularly when we're talking about combating EV fires, the hardest thing is identifying that we're working with an EV. How do we know that getting there? Is our dispatch grabbing that information from the caller telling us, hey, my car is an electric vehicle and it's on fire or whatever location? Or is the dispatcher asking, hey, what's your fuel source? Is it powered by gas, diesel, hydrogen, CNG, LPG, LNG? Is it an EV? Is it a hybrid? There's so many options out there now that are challenging us as firefighters that we get on scene. We have what? 10 seconds to make that decision of what actually we're working with on scene. And how does that work? Looking at this flow chart here that FSRI put together, but it mirrors the same thing that LAFD put together. How do you go through that just for an EV? And then you're trying to dictate that on scene. And it starts with your size up. It's identifying at first, 100% out the door, is there a life safety hazard or not? If there's not a life safety hazard, we can kind of take a split second to kind of digress a little bit and start diving more into it. If there's a rescue hazard, absolutely we got to engage immediately and try to go get that life and render them safe out of the vehicle. But what are you looking for on that size up? Can you identify early on? If you can't, like Dan was saying earlier, treat it like a typical auto fire. Extinguish the cabin fire then. Put majority of the fire out and shut the nozzle down for a second and see what you're working with. It may have just been an internal combustion engine. You're plenty good. The fire's done and you guys did your thing. Or you may shut it down and it is an EV, but just the passenger space compartment was on fire anyways, and you did your job and it never got to the batteries. Or you give it a few minutes and then you're looking like, hey, all right, well, the fire's out. And just like his video showed, now I do have battery involvement. And now we need to start changing our tactics. What does that look like for us moving forward? So if you're going to do that, then you're going to press to identify. So you move over to, okay, what am I working with? I know I'm working with an EV fire now. Do I need to put it out or do I not need to put it out? Was it just a cabin fire? Studies show, at least up to 2024, that 60% of the EVs that were documented across the country were just passenger space fires. The batteries never even got involved. So I encourage you not to take a full, complete defensive posture in extinguishing these fires if you have the ability to and not have to remain on scene and have them to go through their events. And then once the fire's out, like I said, reassess. Did you extinguish all the fire or is there battery involvement moving forward? Or worst case scenario, when you get to your size up, you can't tell what you're working with, but there is exposures. Where our only option is we have to extinguish it even if it is an EV, because we can't have it carry on to the additional exposures, the other vehicles, the parking structure, the garage of the house, or anything like that. So when we're talking about size ups, I've heard, I want to talk about some of the things I've heard out there. People say, oh, I'll be able to tell by the size of the shape of the vehicle. Well, looking at these, I can't tell the difference by the size of the shape, whether it's an internal combustion EV or a regular EV. Charging ports. How many think charging ports is a good indicator? It's not like a normal fuel tank. The fuel tank fill up is pretty much in the same spot almost on every vehicle. Either left or right, but it's in the same spot. With these EVs, they're all over the place. They could be at any one of these locations. So charging port could be a challenge based on when you get on scene if smoke or fire is impacting that. So you can't use that really as a good indicator. Radiators. Which one of these vehicles has a radiator and which one doesn't? Not going to be able to tell either. I see the Chevy there has a radiator inside it. License plates. Some states have done a great job. They've been very proactive with this. They're starting to look at other decal methods to put on the vehicles to help identify. Here in California, the only one we have is the DOT, the carpool lane one that they could utilize if they're using the EV, but that ended about a month ago. So here in California, stickers aren't really a good indicator for us, particularly to EVs, unless the semi-truck company or manufacturer was more proactive to let you know it's an e-mobility semi-truck. It's going to be hard for us to tell. And then other things that have come up, tailpipes. They say, oh, if it's missing a tailpipe, it's an EV. Maybe, but it also could be a hydrogen vehicle, and hydrogen vehicles have tailpipes. And they're just a little bit smaller, but that has a lithium-ion battery pack in it. CNG, the same as well. The only true things you have are those three things highlighted there. Running a VIN, checking for the information in the glove box to see what model and year you're working at. And then if you have a state license plates or have a CHP or somebody on there to run the license plate. But other than that, there is no real true one way to identify what you're working with in your size up. So what can we do to minimize our exposure prior to getting that incident? First, foremost, all vehicle fires that we already knew had some sort of toxic gases and issues that exposed us to it. And we've done a great job of changing our culture for sure. We always talk about this, of making sure we're in full PPEs and SCBA and that we're actually on air. A lot of us, when we got hired, you were chastised for even thinking about putting an SCBA on your back. And now I think we've done a great job of delineating that, getting rid of it, and being proactive in protecting ourselves. Park upwind, uphill if possible, staying out of that plume. Like Dan pointed, the plume had a lot of those toxins and gases and corrosive gases inside the plume. So don't put yourself in that if you don't have to. That already, we're reducing the amount of exposure to our members moving forward. And then working from uphill upwind as much as possible. If you do have to park that downwind, because that's the only way you can get access to the vehicle, then still change your approach. Make sure you come up from upwind and start working towards that vehicle to reduce that impact to our members. And use the hose stream if you got it. Why not? Use it for your reach. Don't expose yourself and get right up on that vehicle. Like Dan said, there are explosive hazards that are coming that they are doing some studies, but there's plenty of videos out there now that I've watched with EV fires where the batteries are the sole component taking place inside that vehicle that's on fire. It's filled up with that white gas cloud that I keep talking about. It's flowing out of that vehicle. You don't have that thick black one that he's talking about that the plastics are burning. And even with the window down, it wasn't enough ventilation for those hydrogen gases to get out of there. And it blew the top off this Jeep and sent it flying in the air and 30 feet away and scared the crud out of the firefighters. And there was one more, even with the trunk lid open and the passenger side door open, because all the batteries got involved in the runaway in the burning process, it caused a little explosion to happen in the vehicle too. Little shrapnel flew out, but I'm just trying to point the fact that there is definitely an explosive element that's taking place in these auto fires that we have to be aware of and be prepared for on scene. So use that hose stream to your advantage. So knock down that cabin fire if possible. Improve your conditions until you can get that secondary size up. If you know you're working with a clear EV and you have a clear space to let it burn, let it burn. Let it do its thing. It's easier to consume the batteries. It's better for the secondary responders. It limits the exposures to our members. But if you have exposures, you're going to have to engage the fire. You're going to have to extinguish it and then do a secondary check. But if you don't know what you're working with, like I said, put the cabin fire out and let's reassess. If there's fire underneath that won't go out, pretty good indicator you're working with your battery packs now. And that's the sole fire source that you're going to have to deal with moving forward. Continue to address the issues, assess the exposures, and determine the strategy. Another thing to consider if you're going to let it burn, chalk the tires of that vehicle. I don't know if you guys have metal chocks on your rigs. Some departments use those. Some departments still use metal ones. Or if you have a piece of 2x4 or something like that for cribbing on your rig for extrication. But find something to chalk those wheels, because if you do let it burn, there is a possibility if that vehicle is, Tesla's not so much, they don't move, but the other manufacturers, that car will move if you let it completely burn. So be mindful of that. Oh, sorry, Dan.
So now we have some things that you might be able to hear, maybe not in the world. In the lab, we certainly heard them, but depending on ambient noise and wind, we heard hissing, something that sounds like a blowtorch. Some of the louder noises are actually not the batteries themselves, but could be struts or other pressure vessels that are included. So you get the idea, there's a lot of things that can erupt, if you will, due to the thermal energy that they're exposed to. So rapid EV ID is challenging. Again, if you show up and the vehicle's not on fire, but there's a white vapor and it's clinging to the ground, that may give you some clues that there's a battery involved. But if it's engulfed in fire, it's going to be very difficult to identify it. So again, the cabin fires can be extinguished. We found typically with 100 to 200 gallons of water. If you then discover that you have an EV fire, you may want to get other resources coming for additional water and staff. Suppression can make the fire smaller, the cabin suppression, exterior plastics. And again, if it is a cabin fire, the cabin is mostly what's involved, you might extinguish the fire and prevent the battery from getting involved. The battery fires present themselves typically as the smoke coming from low on the vehicle or flames coming from out of the wheel wells or under the center of the car. Basically, the battery fires look like a car parked on top of a flammable gas leak. So when you're trying to reassess, do I have a reignition risk? I have it out. I have no sounds. I have no smoke. I have no hot spots. That's good, but that's not a guarantee. So again, time is another issue. How long has this thing been burning? That may help you get a sense of if it's been burning half hour, 45 minutes, an hour, perhaps most of the batteries are burned out. I'd like to be able to give you more certainty, but this is sort of the world we live in, that these are things to look for. And then also coordinate when you feel you've got the situation mitigated with your second responders to let them know they've got an EV and basically what you found during the firefight. What about if it's smoking? So you'd see thick white gray smoke. It wouldn't necessarily be buoyant. It might hug the ground. This could easily be confused for steam during suppression operations. So again, keep a lookout for vapors that are hugging the ground. Battery damage confirmed. We know it smells, but we don't want you to use that as a trigger. You don't want to smell this. You want to be on air. You want to take that away. So be on air. Smoke is a reignition risk. Again, no smoke is good, but not necessarily enough. Was the pack not involved? Smoking stopped very quickly. Was the pack involved? Sometimes we had vehicles that continued to smoke for 2 to 4 hours. Does that mean they couldn't be moved? Depends. We'll talk a little bit more about that. The pack will almost certainly be hot in a thermal imaging view, even after the smoking stops. A lot of stored energy. In that case, thermal energy. Thermal imaging, it's difficult with the car low to the ground to try to get some idea without getting really close to the car. So again, do you want to lift the car? Lifting the car or tilting the car has its own potentially set of challenges. By just moving the car, disrupting the car like that, you might have some batteries that have stranded energy, and now they could go into thermal runaway because they just got shorted out due to movement or jostling. So there's some additional risk there. It's hard to discern from the thermal imaging view, especially if it's one of the cars with the aluminum plate. That plate is so thick and the batteries don't exactly contact that. Typically the chiller and heater plates are between that and the batteries. So again, you'd be waiting for the thermal energy to move through it. You wouldn't get a fast response necessarily. Or if you cooled the surface of the aluminum plate, it might look cool, but really there's a lot of energy there. So again, it's a time type issue here to see that energy come out. Let's see, absence of sounds, smoke. Here we had a situation where we tilted the car and laid it on its side basically. And by doing that, we caused some additional batteries to start to be thermally active. The nice thing in this particular case is the batteries had burnt a hole in the plate. So we could then, with the car tilted, easily fill up that battery container with water, with a small amount of water.
Team back up, 193. 93.
So again, this is for research purposes to show you what we experienced. Again, we need to meld that with your experience on the road and see what's practical. Active fire. Again, assess the exposures. There's no one size that fits all here. What are the exposures? Are they concrete? Is this in a wood frame garage? You know, what kind of action do you need to take? If you're in a confined space, interestingly enough, you'd like to keep it burning because you don't want those gases to build up in that confined space to have an explosion hazard. So fire exposures, you're looking for combustible or structural material above the vehicle. We're looking for 16-foot separation from combustibles, again, in a parking garage that may not be attainable. One of the uses perhaps for a blanket may be to actually protect the exposure vehicle and wet that blanket. You may have a situation where you cannot, it's unacceptable damage to the road surface, could be on a bridge or something. So you might want to try to be cooling that road surface as much as you can. Smoke exposure, again, the people, animals, the environment. As you're approaching the fire, that's something to keep in mind, is the least amount of damage to just let it burn in terms of environmental concern. When you apply water, you make it burn less efficiently. And so now more of the gases that some of the chemicals may not burn up per se and get reduced, but stay in a more toxic form perhaps. Water runoff, is that a concern where you are? Unacceptable traffic conditions created. This seems to be a daily event for everybody, every metropolitan area, whether it's a traffic accident, a breakdown, police activity for whatever reason, that could turn into an hour delay on the Washington Beltway very quickly. I'm sure similar things could happen around here. So again, if you have a vehicle fire of any kind, there's an urgency to get it cleared from the roadway. So what is the fastest way to do that? So that's something to consider as we look at tactics. So we wanted to look at water and standard equipment because that's what fire departments typically have. They've got an engine, they've got 500, maybe 750 gallons of water and a hose line. What can we do with that? What about non-intervention? So you don't have you have no life safety hazard, you have no real exposures, and maybe the fastest way is to just let it burn and you don't intervene. EV nozzle, under the vehicle nozzle. Again, our experience so far, our experience and the experience of some others is it's similar to hoses. Regardless of whether you tilt the car or not, the similar timing, similar water flow result. EV fire blanket is incredibly effective at smothering the fire and getting rid of the flames. However, depending on where you are, again, if you're like in a parking garage, you really got to be careful now because the fire is going to continue to off gas. The batteries are going to continue to off gas. The blanket doesn't provide any cooling. So that means you need to manage the trapped gases. Again, if you're outside and you can operate the blanket in such a way that you're trying to prevent the buildup of gases or let it burn off in a safe direction, you can do that. So again, there's some pros and cons with each of these. The mechanical penetrating nozzles, we haven't tested those yet. We've seen other countries run tests. Some of the testing that goes on is difficult to determine because they'll have one vehicle, they'll get it in thermal runaway, and then they'll try several different tactics or pieces of equipment or operations on it. And so from a science perspective, it's difficult to say what's doing what, or basically when did the batteries burn out? So again, something where some more research is needed there. High pressure water jet cutting. NFPA tested that, and I'll give you a link to their webinar. Again, the timing is about the same as the timing for using the hose stream. The unit itself was very effective. I believe they only used 300 gallons of water through the unit. However, they also, for safety, had other hose lines operating, again, for 20 minutes or more. So the water usage overall really isn't reduced. There's also firefighters that have to be intimate with the vehicle to use this device. You may have one firefighter with a thermal imager looking where to put the water jet. You may have another firefighter that needs to clear the seat frames away so the water jet can get where it needs to go. The car has no value at this point, right? So again, what is your need? What are you trying to accomplish? If you're really trying to render this safe, that's certainly one way to do it. But again, timing and exposure are things to consider. Submersion, there's been some instances of that we've heard in Europe. In Phoenix, I know there were 2 cases where they put EVs in a dumpster and they cut the roof off and they filled the dumpster with wet sand, and that seemed to solve the problem. Again, expensive, used a lot of water. Then what do you do with that afterwards? If you contaminated the sand, if you contaminated the water? Water additives, there have been a number of tests again around the world, as well as the tests that have been done in the US, which indicate that the water additives, again, don't really provide any additional benefit. The results are they're similar to plain water. And again, part of the challenge is because when the batteries are in the car is designed not to let water be effective, right? So if you're struggling to get water on the battery, that's really the challenge, not so much whether there's a chemical in the water or not. OEM suppression ports. I don't believe there's any vehicles in the United States that currently have this. The Renault Zoe, sold in Europe, has a port that's located in the passenger compartment where basically a hose line could go and flow water directly into the battery module. Not sure that having that port inside the passenger compartment is the best location. Again, firefighters would have to get very close, basically looking under the driver's seat to find that port and hook up to it. And there's been a couple of experiences where the battery off-gassed, the gases went through the port to fill the cabin, and then there was an explosion. So again, things that are still being looked at. Vehicle relocation device doesn't control the fire. It's expensive, it's gonna need a lot of training. But again, that may be a device that if you have a car in a parking garage and you can't get people there, maybe you can get this robotic device there to get the car to the parking garage. So more to be considered. One thing that you should not do, definitely do not put a smoking car in a closed sea container, because basically you're making that sea container into a bomb, right? So don't try to say, oh, we're going to put this car in this pressure vessel, something we're going to turn into a pressure vessel, and just shut it, lock it down, and it's going to be okay. Don't assume that. So water and standard equipment. With the Hyundai Kona, it took 110 gallons to knock the initial fire down, and we were pretty happy with that. And then it turned out that the fire was out and we didn't have any, the battery really wasn't burning. We thought it was, but it was not in thermal runaway when no batteries were burned when we took the pack apart later. So we got the fire out pretty quickly. Just had some smoke showing, watched it for a little bit, and felt pretty good about the amount of water. But then again, the batteries weren't engaged. With the Chevy Bolt, about 1,100 gallons initially, and then we tilted it and flowed another 700 gallons. So we had on the order of about 2,000 gallons invested, and the car was out and we felt pretty good. And then we took it apart and, well, 100% of the batteries were burned out. So we managed it, but basically the batteries burned out. A Tesla Model 3, 1,300 gallons and some change to basically control the fire. We again tried to bounce the water into the pack. That was not effective. The Teslas, and some of them, the vents are pointed down and they actually burn through the bottom plate. So this gives you an opportunity to get some water in there. So when we tilted it up, we were able to get water into that hole. There were 4 reignitions within minutes of extinguishment, but then we got it under control. And at the end of the day, when we took the car apart, 60% of the cells had experienced thermal runaway and 40% had stranded energy. So they didn't burn. So here's some video clips of that test. Other things that might give you some clues of the car in distress at various times, either before burning or when it was on fire, we would see the various vehicles' headlights flash on and off, kind of like help me signals or something like that. Here we've tilted it and you can see there's a hole where the flames are coming out and trying to direct water into that hole to fill up that channel. So again, effective, but how long does that take to do on the side of the road? What are the resources you need? That sort of thing. The Ford Mach-E, about 1,000 gallons for the initial knockdown, and then another 765 after we tilted it. Again, we stopped the fire. There were 40% of the batteries left. So here's some video views of that. Again, some of the noise. Trying to focus the water into the wheel wells where there seemed to be access to the battery module. So is that steam or is that vapor? Notice how a lot of it's coming out low. So vehicle construction, again, as we've been saying along, the battery packs are intended to be high strength, sealed against road debris and weather. And so applying water to a non-damaged battery case is highly inefficient at removing heat and stopping or even assessing thermal runaway. Working with the blankets. Here's one example. We did not knock the fire down initially. We're just taking the blanket right over it. The blanket is extremely efficient at knocking down the flames and smothering the flames. But you'll notice that we still have a lot of gas production because it didn't take any heat away. So the batteries are still in thermal runaway underneath. So now we're going to simulate adjusting the blanket or lifting the blanket to investigate what's going on. And then basically when we place the blanket back down, you'll see the conditions are right, that we get an overpressure event and some flames shooting from around the blanket. So we've lifted the blanket. We'll let the blanket back down. And the gas is ignited. Then we did some experiments where we either knocked the fire down first, or we had brought the blanket over the vehicle and had a under vehicle nozzle underneath. The thought being that maybe the under vehicle nozzle would cool the water sufficiently, or cool the gases sufficiently, and cool adjacent hotspots to take away the reignition risk, but that was not the case. In fact, as we went through these, it actually seemed that in some cases, it stirred up the environment and increased the burning rate a little bit. And so again, similar. The fire is burning, they're getting ready to apply the blanket. They're knocking the fire down with a hose stream first before they put the blanket on in this case. Blankets deployed. But again, even with the initial knockdown, we still have batteries and thermal runaway under the blankets. There's tremendous amount of hydrogen and other combustible gas being produced. So again, just if you're using a blanket, be prepared for that, to manage that. Non-intervention, all the batteries burned away 100%. So there was no stranded energy. So again, operate as though every suppressed EV or battery powered vehicle has stranded energy. There could be a shock risk, reignition risk. Stranded energy cannot be assessed without opening the pack. That said, the fire service should not open the pack. Do not open the pack. Even for smaller batteries, do not open the pack. Shock hazard and increased exposure risks. Contact with the pack should be avoided. The fire damages electrical insulation. If there's stranded energy there, there will be a potential shock hazard. Be aware of gas accumulation risk, especially if you're in an enclosed space in terms of toxicity and explosion risk. So my observations between our EV experiments and other EV experiments that I've been able to witness, no intervention, the batteries seem to burn themselves out in 30 to 60 seconds. Hose stream, we're taking between 1,500 and 2,000 gallons to control the fire, even with the batteries. There are other studies such as the NFPA study where those numbers are about double. And in those cases, they were using multiple hose streams. In addition to a suppression hose stream, they were using fog nozzles to try to direct the flow of smoke away from the firefighters as a protective strategy. So something to consider there. Water additives, again, the flow and time were similar to those with the plain water hose stream. EV nozzle, time-wise similar to the plain water hose stream if time is your gauge. The EV fire blanket, as you saw, smothers the fire, but there's a flammable gas hazard that remains, so be prepared for that. Ultra high pressure water jets, again, time-wise similar to the hose stream. Maybe if it's something you're doing post-fire or at some other time as part of a hazmat operation, that might be more effective, but when you're fighting the fire, you're using other hose streams to protect the firefighters as well. And the mechanical penetrating nozzle to be determined. Again, we have concerns about that with regard to making the fire worse. EV fires are the same as internal combustion engine fires until the battery's involved. There's a good chance you won't know that until you try to suppress the cabin fire. You may be able to prevent the battery from thermal runaway if caught early enough. At worst, you cut the size of the fire in half. The pack often destroys all the cells anyway, flaming or not. When the battery is involved, the fires are not significantly faster, larger, or longer burning than an internal combustion engine vehicle. Wear your PPE, use exposure controls, and maintain existing guidance for decontamination. Nothing to the contrary was seen here. Be aware of stranded energy and do not attempt to disassemble, remove, or pierce a battery. and make sure to coordinate with the second responders and educate them. About a week ago, NFPA gave a online webinar for their project, Assessment of EV Firefighting Tactics and Tools, Impact on Stranded Energy. They did a series of tests just on battery packs, and then they did some experiments on full vehicles that were Rivians. They looked at water only, a fire blanket with the under vehicle nozzle, water and agent, and ultra high pressure lance. So I encourage you to look at the work that they did and make some comparisons. Again, there's a big shortage of data out there for this kind of testing. So I encourage you to look at whatever you can.
Okay, bring it all home here. We've thrown a lot at you guys. There's a lot of case studies that are out there. I encourage you guys to read up on a lot of this stuff. So much to learn from. Like I said, we're barely touching the surface with this stuff. If you haven't heard about the Sacramento incident up north back in April, it was an EV physical rescue. The members were kind of in a waiting for the tow truck phase of the incident, and a gas cloud overtook them and gave them significant respiratory issues, at which they're been off the job since April. And these are some of the symptoms that they were experiencing initially on from the exposure. And they're looking like maybe not even making it back on the job. They may be medically retired because they can't get their respiratory levels up when they're under exertion. So can't stress enough the importance of using your PPEs. We talked about size ups today, the importance of your incident, battery incident, understanding what type of lithium battery incident you're dealing with. Where is it located? Is it an open area? Is there exposures? Is it below grade? Is it above grade? Is it an enclosed environment, compartmentalized environment? Is there audible indicators that you're hearing, visual indicators, kind of to give you an idea if you're working with lithium-ion battery before you make entry into the, and is there a property owner or business owner on scene? Can somebody tell you, yeah, it's my EV bike in the garage, I was charging, it started to smoke, I ran out. Or if you're at a BESS facility, I encourage you guys at a BESS facility, get a hold of that site manager, somebody that's in charge of that, just like an electrical yard, and start navigating with them and start getting more information before making entry. Look at your tactical decisions, working through the things that we already know, starting with the first and foremost, protecting that life. Do we have a rescue problem? Engage immediately, remove those victims out of there and start getting them medical attention. And then start dealing with the fire problem. Is it being held in check by a sprinkler already? Do you need to establish a hose line? Is it something that we're going to be allowed to burn later on and just let it take its full course? Like he showed in those studies, those EVs that he let completely burn, consume all of 100% of the batteries. There's no longer a problem from that point forward. Looking at your water runoff and being mindful of that. If you're working a commercial fire, that's a battery factory or an e-bike manufacturer, you may have significant water issues coming out of there. Where are your members standing? Or you're doing a defensive posture and you got master streams, all your equipment sitting in that water, the turnouts are soaking in all those contaminants. Keep that in mind and use your hazmat teams to start checking that environmental runoff, or get your second responders, your environmental entities that are available to you to start looking at that. And do you need any additional support on these incidents? Do you need subject matter experts to help kind of navigate this incident, bring you up to speed on the technology, bring you up to speed of some of the hazards that you're dealing with, or maybe even third-party outside vendors that you know that build this stuff? That's their main job, is to understand this stuff. Maybe somebody from Tesla or something like that that can help you navigate some of these emergencies when you're dealing with them. E-mobility devices, once again, just consider the location. Like early on in the presentation, Dan mentioned about how FDNY's non-structure incidents have risen. And because they're moving them out of there, the citizens are understanding the hazards and moving that environment. Here in the city of Los Angeles, the people experiencing homelessness, we have a slew of them where we're dealing with the e-scooters in this. We're going to just a normal rubbish fire, and it ends up being there's lithium batteries in there. And how many people are suiting up and going on air for a rubbish fire? I don't know too many people that are suiting up to go on a rubbish fire just to extinguish it. It's outdoors. Good possibility the gases are lifting. They're supposed to lift, and you look at them individually. But if there's a heavy amount of it, and depending on the environment you're working in, they may stay low like we've been talking about today, and it'll expose your members. So consider that. The devices, whether it's currently charging, you may have to address that issue as well. Consider your extinguishing techniques if you're going to let it burn. Submersion, there's a lot of case studies out there, and that's a lot of topic. Do I stick it in water? Do I stick salt in the water? Do I stick sodium carbonate in the water? Do I do a mixture of both? EPA, there's a phenomenal study out there the EPA did with the Lahaina study of showing the different mixtures of submersion and what were the outcomes. At the end of the day, it took 21 days, regardless of what solution they used, for the battery to become completely de-energized when it sat in that container. So something to think about. FD&Y, they use other products when they're doing batteries above ground in their high rises. They're packaging them in the metal drums and they're sealing them before they bring them downstairs. Here in the city, we're using plastic drums and we're submerging them and we're bringing them down that way, if possible. So there's 100 different ways to kind of do it. You just have to kind of just consider what's going to be best case for you guys and what's the policy. We've seen the videos when it comes to removing batteries out of high rises though. I can't stress the importance enough. As a last resort, do not use the elevator to transport the batteries. If you have to, as the only case scenario, you're just dealing with a mass amount of batteries. If you're going to do it, it's a coordinated effort. And please, nobody goes inside that elevator. Do not put anybody inside that elevator moving forward. Here's an example when you submerge a battery and this is what's taking place. How many think you're in a good spot now? The battery's good. How many know gases is coming off that water? All that bubbling, that's vapor coming up. That gas is immersing into the air then. So just because you submerged it, you don't just stick it in the corner of the apartment and now do your thing. Gases are still coming off that, so be mindful of that. The EVs, once again, what type of incident? What is the make and model? What we may be dealing with? Is it an open area we can let it burn? Is it in an enclosed area? Is there the explosive hazard where the gases are building up inside the compartment space? A lot of us will consider a parking structure, if it's a standalone by itself in a parking structure, it's safe to leave it there and let it burn. But what's that impact doing to that concrete, that heat intensity that we've been talking about all day? How's that handling on the structure? And just factor in, what are you seeing? Use your senses you have to you. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? And what other incidents do you have take place? And then the other hard part about this is how are you getting these vehicles out of the parking structure now? Let's say you have one and it's side by side of a vehicle, and so you extinguish it because you don't want the next auto, the next auto, the next auto to start taking off. But then how are you getting that vehicle out of that parking structure? How many parking structures have a good high ceiling? Not too many of them. So how many tow trucks are able to get in there? And then if you're going to tow that vehicle, how can you get it fully off the ground so the wheels don't start charging the batteries again as it starts moving? Some of the manufactured designs do that. So these are the things that we have to work through moving forward. And then do you follow the vehicle back to the tow yard? Do you send a fire company? Or is there another agency that handles that? I know FD&Y, when they called us and asked us how we're handling it, they're dealing with the issue that the tow truck companies over there don't want to deal with the EVs because they're not what we call HAZWOP trained here in California. They don't have hazmat training and they understand the hazards that come with it. So they're not wanting to touch it. So do you have to train and identify tow companies in your agencies or your jurisdictions on how to properly do this? And then what does that space around the vehicle look like in a tow yard? How long do they have to stow? And they're all going to be asking you guys that questions moving forward. Extrication, real quick. If you guys haven't heard, there's a great app called EV Rescue. It used to be for free. They now charge, I think it's like 99 cents a month. I'll have a slide where you get to they gave us 2 months free to kind of play around with it. If you guys haven't, it's a great tool. How many know where the batteries are located in every vehicle and every model you show up to for extrication? Where to cut, where not to cut? Where other batteries should you consider? If you did let the car burn out, how do you know it consumed all the batteries or not all the batteries? And this app, it's a great app. It does it just for you. Has pretty much almost every make and model of every year of EVs that's out there. If it doesn't, call them, they'll put it in. Identifies all the hazards, the high voltage, where to cut, where not to cut. Anything in orange has to do with electrical. Lifting, if you are going to move it out of the parking structure or you're going to rise it for your extrication, you got a victim trapped underneath. Where can you safely lift? And then the cut zones for your battery locations. And this is on top of the other hazards that you have to consider when you're looking at extrication. This is a whole new animal. Like I said earlier, when do you know after an impact, this would be one of the abuses that the battery would go through in a traffic collision, right? Mechanical abuse had a significant impact that either punctured the pack or the pack got rattled so much that it's going to cause it to have possibly an event, a thermal runaway event. When's that going to happen on scene while we're doing extrication? We don't know. Or what happens when you're doing the extrication and you didn't identify where the batteries are and you start pushing, pulling, prying, and now you did impact the batteries. How many hose lines do you have on the ground for protection? You know, I've talked to a lot of agencies. Do you have one down? Do you have one down for the cutting team, one down for the victim inside the car? What are you doing with those gases if it starts to off gas and get in that passenger space, the victims that are trapped in that vehicle? How many people on your cutting team are on air? Do you need a RIC component? Do you set up a positive pressure blower to push the gases away in anticipation if it starts to go in a runaway? Like I said, those SAC fire guys, they got lucky. They completed, not lucky, but they completed it initially without having an event. And that's why their guard was probably down that, hey, this car's not going to do anything. And then 45 minutes later, it started to off gas and that gas cloud came over them. So it's all things that we need to consider in the fire service and start revamping how we're thinking and what we're looking at when it comes to extrication. This one here, just real quick, is another example happened back in April in Belgium. An EV charging inside of a garage, just hammering home the importance of just safety. It had an explosion event. It blew out that whole first floor of that deck. There was garages across the way, blew out 5 other doors, and it makes 7 other apartments inhabitable moving forward. So these are the things that we're going to be challenged with moving forward. We've painted how many more are going to be on the roadway, and it's just something that we're going to have to navigate through as a fire service and protect ourselves. Unfortunately, I will not be able to get into the energy storage with you guys. All I can recommend is that identify where they are in your city, get a hold of somebody on site, start gathering that information. If you haven't read the case study yet, there's one from Surprise, Arizona. I strongly encourage you to read that one where the firefighter death happened. It stresses the importance of understanding these systems, not making entry in them, letting them just take their event, let them have it, and you're just going to be doing some air monitoring down the road, and your hazmat teams are going to be tasked with it a little bit more. At lunch, I can talk to you guys about it if you have questions regarding BESS. And then the energy hazard guide, the IFF just put this out, how long ago, Dan? I forget when this came out, the guide.
A few months ago.
Yeah, a few months ago. Another great reference tool for you guys. If you guys want to take a look at that, kind of gives you a good starting point if you don't have an SOP or an SOG. I was hoping to talk to you guys about our incident, and I was hoping to talk to you about transportation, but biggest thing with transportation is understanding the UL numbers that are out there, being familiar with them when you're showing up. There's explosion hazards with this too. This was a trailer that had DDR batteries going to recycling center. The pressure built up in the 5-gallon drums while this guy was at a rest stop and blew the whole tractor out. So similar situation here at a storage yard. And this is an example right here. See the video play of what happens with these things.
So we'll be doing more research on the overpacks in December. So this was one of our pilot tests.
But this is how they're getting packaged for transport going across the country when they're going to recycling centers. So just be aware of it, guys. And the last hot topic, decom procedures. I get this question a lot. TEEX came out with a study last year. If you haven't seen it, you can read it. There's mixed reviews on it and how it's conducted. But it's at least something for us to work off of moving forward and how they went about it. Long story short, they're stating that as long as you stick your turnouts through an extractor or a CO2 emissions extractor, they kind of had similar results of pulling the products out. Like Dan said earlier, they're working on their study that'll hopefully be out here in a month or two, and we could start kind of navigating this new world of what does proper decon look like. But in the meantime, the best practices that we're recommending is on scene, doing a nice normal hazmat gross decon. Fine mist, not a blasting spray, spray down the members. We're keeping them on air and then have them remove all their products, all their turnouts, get them in a bag safely, and then they can kind of doff their face piece and then put the bag in the hose bed. Don't put it in a compartment. Don't put it in the cab of the vehicle. Get home, take a shower, and wash the turnouts accordingly to your department policy or standard, or ship them out to a professional cleaning service. The one thing that I took away from the TEEX, and it's probably going to come back from their study as well, is the problem is our breathers. Our breather straps are so porous, there's no way we can send those through an extractor. And all those gases and metals that we talk about that are in the air that we're not seeing, that are absorbing onto those straps, it's almost going to be impossible to get that all off of there. The only recommendation at this point is obviously on scene doing a heavy decon with it. If you got like a deck brush, or if your hazmat team from their decon equipment has a deck brush, soap and water, and just try to scrub the straps the best you can. But keep in mind of that technology that's on those straps. I'm sure your department is not going to want us damaging your breathers and asking for a breather every year or throwing them away and getting a new strap. So that is going to be one of our biggest challenges outside of hose, of getting it fully deconned and making it rendered safe. Just letting your relief know too that you had a fire the next day. Hey, we had a heavy lithium-ion battery fire. So when they go to do their breather check and they're throwing it, they're mindful of that moving forward and kind of take their own safety precautions. Here's the EV Rescue app. If you don't have it, here's the QR code to download it. That code there will give you 2 months free of the app. Play around with it. Like I said, I strongly encourage you guys to utilize it, especially on a physical rescue. The last thing I want to see is you guys get in harm's way or unsure of where the batteries are. And I can put it back up for lunch for you guys. Other than that, that's it that we have for you guys today. Obviously, there's way more that we could be talking about and going over. If you have any questions, we'll be around through lunch. Here's both mine and Dan's contact information up there. If you guys have any questions, we'll be happy to answer it. And Dan, unless you have anything else, I'll turn it over to Andy.
No, thank you.
Okay, that's a lot of information to take in 4 hours, and I totally understand. I know you guys have been here for a while. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for you wanting to learn about this new stuff that's coming out that can hurt us. I know we're late for lunch, but we have two amazing people here that I don't want them to leave without answering your questions. So I'm going to give you guys, we'll give you an extended lunch, but I'm going to give you guys an opportunity to ask questions. So for right now, if you have any questions, please come up to the mic. I'd like to get those answered before you guys leave. You've got them right here. So I know you guys call me. We give you as much as we can, but you have the experts that I call. So if you guys have any questions, please go to the mic, please. Yes, sir.
Are you finding that turnouts and SCBA are sufficient PPE when we're being exposed to products like HF coming off these cars that have vapor that would typically be like a level A entry on a hazmat if you had like a hydrogen fluoride case, like you had your firefighters in your videos there, they're being hands-on with the blankets, being exposed to the product. Did they suffer any medical issues after that? Or is turnouts and SCBA proving to be sufficient?
What we found on the scene, I know Dan's done a lot of experiments like Dan's showed, he could probably talk on it. Obviously, with the turnouts, the metals and stuff, we're still getting through the case studies they have, still getting through all the layers. As far as the gases go, with one of the energy storage systems we had that was overturned down in the port, we did have our team on air wearing their SCBAs. We followed the 330-foot rule with the ERG that states for large-scale lithium-ion batteries that you have to be on air if you're going to enter that space. It's supposed to be full encapsulating, obviously, but they're still experiencing some health issues from it, a little shortness of breath or some every once in a while, or a periodic cough. So to tell you that's 100% proof, I can't tell you that. Everything's kind of up in the air. It depends on your fit. Depends on when's the last time you had your face piece tested. When was the last time you got sized for your turnouts? Is it the same turnouts you've had since your rookie year and you're still using them till, for a 20-year career, or is it something that you just got a new set? There's so many parameters, and that's the hardest part with all this, where people ask me questions about, hey, metals testing and blood work and exposures and what does this look like? A lot of us, we never really did a baseline blood test because we never had to. We don't know what our exposure limit is. How much are we really getting exposed to now than we did 5 years ago? I can't tell you that, because unless somebody knew this problem was coming, we don't have that data. Or unless your fire department was very proactive in their hazmat physicals and really tested for heavy metals, like you're supposed to every year, you know, you may have that, but we don't have that data. And this is what I'm talking about. There's just not enough data out there right now to really state some of the safety features that we're concerned about and the exposure limits and the thresholds and everything else that kind of goes with it. It's going to take time to start collecting this data, Dan.
Yeah, where in the SCBA certainly is key. We did some studies, not with lithium ion batteries, but just with firefighters going into typical structure fire environments. And we had them breathe into a tube to check for metabolites before they did the firefight. We took their blood, we took their urine. For folks that were wearing SCBAs, when they blew into the tube again, there's no evidence of contamination in their respiratory system. That said, metabolites did show up in their blood and their urine, indicating that was getting in through their skin. So again, that's just a typical firefighting environment. Some of the people that had the worst exposures were the engineers outside the structure that basically had no protection. So another thing to think about, whether it's a regular fire or an EV fire.
Any other questions operationally? Anything that you might be confused on? Okay, I know you guys have a ton of questions. You probably ask them at lunchtime, so that's okay. So again, let's give a round of applause to Dr. Dan Mandrukowski and Captain Thompson, please. Great job.